So this will be so Vexer and Ben10 before Ben10 stopped playing Summoner Wars for a little bit. Went through every single wave of releases for the Summoner Wars 2's decks, and so far they've or Vexer and Ben came up with this Summoner Wars 2 power tier list. Um, so it's been 6 months. So I think me and Vexer will go through the criteria for this tier list and what each rank means. And then afterwards, we'll move on to the Wave 4 factions. Hey, Vexer.
Hey, hello. Hey, welcome everyone, and hey, glad to be here with you, Shara. So, yeah, we're going to be continuing this tier list in which I would call it an in-depth tier list, right? In which we're not only classifying them, but going into a detailed analysis to try to justify why we would make the argument that they're at one level or another. So, yeah, I'm ready to kick things off. Anything you want to
Sounds good.
add
So
before we do?
yeah, first as a refresher, what do the different tiers mean? So what is the difference between, for example, S tier and A tier, and A minus tier, B and C?
Yeah. So we wanted to keep things simple from the perspective of the meaning of all of these things, because at the end of the day, with power levels, things can start getting a bit subjective, and that's what we wanted to avoid. So those levels are simply S tier is above the power baseline. So something that is clearly more powerful than the previous iterations that you had of those similar type of effects. A is the power baseline. So that's where you would expect or you would want most decks to be, in which the type of effects you have are similar to what you've had in the past. And there's a clear relationship between the cost and the effect that you're getting. So that's the A tier. We had A minus because that's what I would call slightly below the power baseline. So those are decks that most of its cards are on that power baseline, but there are a few of them which are uh, from weaker to useless, right? Like some of those in which we had like, yeah, this card, we've figured out like PHG and Oz that that card shouldn't really cost that, should cost less. Every single tournament they adjusted because that's understood by the community and everyone that that should be the power level. But that being overcosted makes it useless, right? So that weakens the overall faction level, and that's where most of them land in the A minus because it's not a general effect of the whole deck. It's just a couple components which are slightly broken. And then on tier B, that one is below the power baseline, right? So it's not slightly, like that one is clearly below the power baseline. So when you're playing those type of factions, you tend to notice how your cards are simply weaker, and you have a harder time being able to compete with things which are around like the A or S tier. You rely a little bit more on luck or on the opponent's mistakes to be able to come on top. But things being equal, you will usually be on the losing end with a B tier or a C tier, right? A C tier is where we're simply calling it like decks which are just way weak, like way weaker than everything else. They have multiple things that are problematic, and they're simply weak decks that have a hard time competing with the rest. So that one we could simply call it significantly below the power baseline. So they tend to have multiple cards which are almost like useless or very situational that you discard most of the time to try to just rely on a few other cards that are a little bit more around the power baseline and allow you to compete, like with the Vanguard, right? Like the Knight is a good card. So most of the games with Vanguard, like you tend to just to try to abuse the Knight and discard many of the other ones. Cave Goblins was a bit of an exception because they're actually not weak overall. The thing is, they're very draw dependent, so that's why they can still beat any like S tier deck on a good hand with a good start, but it's not going to happen very often, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
rely on a very specific order of your gates and your events. So that's why those are there. So those are kind of an exception, right? Like it's hard to just call them weak in the same way that the Vanguard are weak. but they're not consistent, and that's why we ended up calling them C. But that's more of a a wild card type of faction, right? Like sometimes it can play like an A tier, the next game it can be a B, the next one it could just be horrible, and you're just like C. So that's the criteria we're following for the tier list, and today we're going to continue with a wave for decks.
Mm. And you'd say, ideally, in your ideal world, all the decks would be A or A minus tier, or would that be accurate?
Yes, so that's the way I would say it. Like, if you actually were worried about the power balancing of the factions and you were doing, like every season, doing adjustments for power balance so that everything has a chance of beating everything more consistently and things are more even, that's how I would call it. Because and they will never be able to be all A tier, right? Because some
Mm-hmm.
of the themes or the nature of some of the decks, they're always going to have some significant weaknesses compared to some other type of abilities which tend to be stronger. Things like being able to attack multiple times through the same flank. Not every faction will be able to have that, but the ones that do, they tend to have a slight advantage to ones that are not able to do those type of things, and it's harder to get like unexpected assassination turns. So that's why it's only going to be natural in this type of game that you will have some of them which will always be on the weaker end of the spectrum, some others on the stronger end of the spectrum. There was conversations like sometimes we talk about an A plus, right? Like factions, we didn't want to muddy the waters too much with this one, so we had been classifying them still as A because those ones are just slightly above the power curve, the power baseline. But there's a very gray area in between an A and an A plus tier. And today we're going to be able to give the perfect example of the A plus and how it differs from other ones. But for this tier list, we were just classifying them still as A plus.
Okay.
Sorry, as A on the A tier, like
Mm-hmm.
anything that was on that margin. But from the ones that we have so far in here, it was really none of them. Maybe the sand goblins could be falling in that category. Maybe the swamp orcs could be falling closer to the A plus. Um, I guess the high elves, it's hit or miss because they do have some matchups which are really hard. Like their ability is really strong. They have some great tricks, but they have a lot of like it's not something that it's always going to be that way. Like if they just manage to get into your face, now your abilities are not that great because the opponent also has them. So we're gonna see with the Crimson Order, like that's gonna be an interesting faction to cover, and we'll be able to tell the difference between these things while we cover it.
And one last question. So this list is independent of new releases. So, for example, if four more Storm Goblins decks get released, Fungal Doors will still be S tier just because of the intrinsic power of the deck, which you're grading, not necessarily the matchups, right? Or
Exactly. Yes. So we won't be updating this as more decks come out. Which if Fungal Dwarfs is a perfect example, right? Like it was considered to be one of the top factions, but now some of the newer decks that came out, like starting with Swamp Orcs, and now like the Goblins are what's the name of those dudes?
oh, Storm
The
Goblins,
electric rat there. The one that you mentioned. I always forget the names of these things. The
Storm Goblins,
Storm
or
Goblins, Storm Goblins, yeah. Like I always, even the cards, like I always remember the effects, forget the names. But yeah, like that's a perfect example with the Fungal Dwarfs, right? In which it just feels like an impossible matchup. And if you were thinking for a tournament pick in which you're considering like a meta game or something like that, then you would say like, well, these guys are not S tier. But right now we're really just focusing on a like pound per pound type of power of all the components of a faction and their synergy and what they can do on your average game, right? On not on a specific couple matches which might be horrible, but just as an overall way in which they are able to execute against your average faction. So yeah, so that's a good call out there. We're really not thinking about meta games because at the end of the day, if you were thinking about a tier list for like the meta game, you would really be just thinking about how it plays out against all the other top tier factions, which is what in the tournament scene, I think like half of all the matchups you end up having are just against most of the top A and the S tier uh, factions. So then the best one would really be like the one that has the best matchups on those specific scenarios, right? So I think that type of narrow list would be a little bit more boring and not
Mm.
of that much interest to most of the people who just really play for fun. Who's just really thinking about like, hey, how does this faction play out against everything without focusing on a specific metagame type of scene.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like Ben and you said last time, this tier list is independent of anyone should pick whatever faction they have fun with, whether or not it's we think it's strong or not. Whatever you have fun with is, of course, the most important part for this game.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Should we start with Crimson Order?
Yeah, let's start with the order. And this pair of factions was the last pair of what I call the golden era or the golden age of Summoner Wars, in which every pair we were getting was like very balanced, extremely fun. The themes that they were bringing felt unique. So let's start with the Crimson Order. So let's start with Daymar. So this was one of the first summoners, if not the first, that was able to heal. Right? It wasn't very common to be able to heal the summoner. So the whole theme revolves around using the health of the summoner as a resource, and then having the opportunity of recovering that well, as long as you're able to keep Daymar in the exchange, like trading and being part of the action. So he has a low starting amount of life for a summoner that is not only going to be support, but that needs to be trading. But that's just because you're going to be healing a lot, so it doesn't feel like he doesn't have a lot of health. Same thing for the attack value. That's the lowest attack value we have for range summoners, but there are some effects that can make him attack much more. So yeah, it's not like a low attack type of summoner. And then he has a integrated defensive ability. So this is something very important for summoners when they're gonna have to be trading, having some type of means in the deck to protect themselves so that they cannot simply just counterattack you and just hit you for a ton of dice, because a lot of factions can deal a lot of damage or multiple attacks through a single flank. So these are some of the key pillars that we'll see about this faction.
Cool.
So let's go to the champs. Let's take a look at the champs. We have a very diverse set of champions in here. Like the first one is a little bit situational, like Sekhmet, very high cost, but it's worth the value, right? Usually it's not easy to be able to pay for a 7 magic summoner, but this one, it's a very strong one. Like Flight gives you a way of getting that assassination kill that this deck lacks. Those type of a lot of unexpected surprises or tricks. So Sekhmet gives you, even though it's very easy to telegraph him, but it gives you an option there. It's really hard. And the negative ability, it's not that punishing compared to what we had for this type of units in the past. Something like the Eater in Cave Goblins, in which it would just die immediately if unless you sacrificed another unit if it didn't destroy something. This one only deals 2 damage, so it's very manageable. So it's a solid champ, and you're gonna tend to have a decent amount of magic with the Crimson Order, so it's not terribly hard to play him. Many times the decision comes around Casimira, like you either play Sekhmet or Casimira. Sometimes you can play both.
Mm.
Casimira is the baseline of stats that you're gonna be getting on a champion, or 5 magic, so that's 7 health, 3 melee with a positive ability. In this case, this positive ability is almost as good as it gets, in which whenever they attack, in this case, they also have to destroy something, but then you're getting the equivalent of 1 magic in value. So those tend to be the strongest ones. In this case, you're going to be getting Occultist back, which then you can use for Daymar for that defensive ability of his. or simply to discard for magic. Like it gives you a lot of versatility when you're getting a full card back. It's an extremely strong champion. And remember that 3 melee, this deck has ways of making it 4 melee easily with the priest that will cover. So she's a very strong champion. I would say she's slightly above the curve of the 5 magic champions. So solid one. Then Besna Brana, it's a very unique champion, I would say. It's on the lowest amount of magic we tend to get for a champion, which is 3. So that makes it very easy to play in every single game if you want to play it. And I love that ability. It's extremely unique in which they have to spend 3 attacks to kill him. That's it, right? So a lot of decks have, well, some decks have ways of dealing damage outside of attacks, but it's not that common. So if you're facing something that has that scenario, like sand goblins, then you usually just discard the best. Now, but for all the other ones that most of their damages they'll be attacks, it's a must play. Like I think this is definitely above the baseline of a champ. Is almost a must play champion, except on the matchups in which they can easily deal damage outside of the attack phase, especially when you see that there is an event that allows you to heal him. So there's nothing more devastating that like you hit Vesna Brasna twice and then
Heal.
they do a transfuse and just heal him back full back to health. So yeah, I never attacked Vesna twice at first just because of that. If I'm not going to be able to kill him immediately that turn, I only attack him once. And then if they want to do a transfuse for one attack, okay, I can take that. But dealing 2 attacks and then giving them a chance for a transfuse, it's a recipe to lose that game. So it's an awesome champion. So we can see all the champions are solid, really playable. Maybe Segment is the only one that is more situational because in some matchups you just prefer to spam a ton of warriors. And let's take a look at those warriors. Like that's probably one of the strongest commons that we have around. The stats are just the usual baseline for a tank, the tank 2 magic unit, which is like 2 melee, 5 health. And they usually have a positive ability. But in this case, this positive ability is extremely strong. At the expense of 1 damage on your summoner's life, you get a +2 on strength. So 2 melee, an extra 2 melee is extremely strong. Like there, we don't really have any unit that can usually attack constantly at that rate that has 5 life, right? So the other baseline for 2 magic is 4 health and 3 melee. So he's able to hit above that, and then there are still some tricks and synergies with the deck that can allow him to attack for 5. Like it's not hard to be attacking for 5 melee, even 6. That's more uncommon, but 5 and 6. So very few decks are going to be able to compete on an economic type of game of like a game of attrition against that, especially because that's one of your starting units. So it means that you have 5 of those in the deck, and then we're going to see that some events allow you to play up to 9 warriors in a game, right? So that's the limit of how many warriors you're going to be able to play. It's not a super like that uncommon to do that. Like there are some games in which if you have the magic because the opponent's deck gives you a lot of magic, you can just keep bringing them and they're going to have a hard time racing against you if you use that. So we can see here that the first common is one of the best commons of that type just because the summoner is able to keep healing, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be as useful. So yeah, let's go to the next one. So the priest. This is a support type of unit. We can see it has the traditional stats for that type of unit in which that costs 1. So that is 3 health and then 2 attack. When you have 3 attack, it tends to be a unit that is more focused on trading, on combat. When you have 2 range, it's a unit that tends to shine more just being behind supporting other units. This is the perfect example of that. You're able to summon directly next to Daemar, which is significant because many times when you're attacking with Daemar, you want those attacks to be relevant to be able to kill something. If you're just attacking 3 range, that's harder. But if you're attacking 4 or 5, you have a much better chance of killing something. So being able to summon right next to Daymar allows you to align your units for those attacks. And otherwise, it's hard. This deck, it's like one of its main weaknesses is the moves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like their moves are a bit predictable. They rely on melee quite a bit with the warriors, so you always have to be moving around, and you always feel like you're short on moves. So that protector unit, it's significant. And the really strong one is giving +1 to damage units. The warriors are tough to bring down in a single turn with 5 health. So that means that those priests are going to be able to be supporting them, to be hitting for 3 melee base, 5 melee with the ability. That's extremely strong type of attack, but that works with all your units. So the champions, they're also going to be surviving the turn after they come out. And even some of the smaller units, sometimes like, hey, there's going to be a whiff on the opponent's attack, and you're going to be able to boost them. So those priests are extremely strong in the deck just because of that level of synergy that they have. I would say they are also above the power baseline for support units, meaning that their ability is just extremely useful for the deck in almost every single instance. Like getting those +1s on multiple attacks really changes things quite a bit. All right, and then we have the cultists. These are more of let's see, the engine of the recursion engine of the deck, and part of the defensive components of the deck, part of also the spamming component of just crowding the board and overwhelming the opponent. Because the part of the theme that I didn't mention is it's outlasting the opponent, outlasting the game, being able to play an attrition long game that is just going to drain them out of energy. And that's how where they shine. And the cultists are part of that. So they're this type of small unit that doesn't really cost magic, and they're going to be coming back time after time. They can be used to place in front of Daymar or covering one of the flanks of Daymar with the servant's ability that we saw. And the Doom Cultist is the piece that allows you to be a little bit more offensive. So when you're on the offensive, when you're trying closing the distance and going after the opponent, you love to use these ones, right? They have the baseline stats, which is for a 0 cost unit, you have 2 life and 2 melee. So that's pretty common for those. And it has a very relevant ability when you're chasing the opponent and you're uh, taking away their space, right? You're clogging their front gates and you're rushing them on their back rows, so they don't really have a lot of space. Then that curse ability is significant. It's really painful for them on a long game to be taking not only the attacks that you every now and then manage to deal, but taking those pings. So this one is a team player, I would say. Many times it's the one that you discard when you need some magic, because unless you're able to do the curse ability useful, then it's probably not worth it and you prefer to be doing something else. If it's only going to be a 2-2, many times you will just do something else, unless it's useful just to clog a gate or get that third attack, right? Like, it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just that unless you get the curse, it's just going to be a pretty generic unit that for what it's going to be doing. But it's a team player. Same thing for the Devout Cultist. This is a card that is a lot of people find it very frustrating. Sometimes, I mean, I find it frustrating too, but it has its pros and cons. The thing is, at the end of the day, it's just going to be a luck-based ability. How many times they're going to be coming back? The expectation in a game is that 1/3 of all of the cultists that they play, they're going to be coming back, because those are the odds of rolling a special. So anything above the 1/3 of those, like if they play 9 of them, you can expect at least 3 to come back for free with the ability. But it's very frustrating when they play 9 and they get 6 of those, right? Like they
Yeah.
totally beat the odds, and then it becomes really hard to beat them when they just keep getting free units that way. But it also has the disadvantage of giving the opponents easy magic, right? Because we can see in these stats, this also tends to be like the baseline is 2 health, 2 melee, but in this case it's 2 range, meaning that this is more of a support unit that you use for the ability, not so much for the role that it's going to be having in combat. And yeah, that's exactly where it shines. Like Daymar really needs those shields to keep coming back so that you're able to keep using Daymar. And yeah, sometimes like just you're gonna get a few of them back, which allows you to keep putting pressure on the opponent and just keep putting more units on the board that they're gonna be able to be dealing with. So we can see there are no bad units, right? Like all of them uh, play a role, a very important role in what the deck is trying to do. We have some very just raw power on them, like the warrior, and we have very solid team player and support units with the priest and the cultists.
Yeah, just a note. What you were talking about the Doom cultist. Completely agree with everything you said. And then also, curse also sometimes can be used as a surprise mechanism for a lot of people not expecting. Because like you said, we're not expecting assassination attempts. Usually, you can predict the movement of uh, the Crimson Order outside of segment pretty well. But Doom cultists sometimes are able to get a Tomb cultist next to or 2 spaces away from a 1 HP summoner behind a gate and get the assassination by killing it. So, very cool unit.
Yeah, those are some of the best finishes. Like I've seen even some games with senior players who have been playing for a while that forget about that. And yeah, when the your summoner is behind the 10 gate, you think you're safe, you manage to escape, and then a Doom cultist just runs to the front of your gate and gets sacrificed, or they just attack their own cultist and deal the last damage. Those are those are really fun.
Yeah, very satisfying. You want to
Yeah.
go over the
All
events?
right, so let's take a look at the events. So this is one of the peculiar things of this faction. Like we'll see this level of power in the events, and the fact that there is very very little decision making on them of about like, hey, should I use the event or this card? Because they're just so good and so easy to use that you tend to use every single one of them. Like it's very rare to discard any of this event. So the first one is Transfuse. This one allows a damage unit that is adjacent to another opponent's unit, even a champion, to deal 2 damage to that thing and then heal for 2, right? So the only condition here is that your unit has to be damaged, which is not that hard to do, right? Like, I mean, sometimes when I play against the Crimson Order, I try to not leave anything damaged. Like, I always try to just finish them off just so that they cannot even use Transfuse or that they cannot use the priest. But many times, even if you're aiming for that, there's going to be some whiffs or things like that in which they survive. And then they're going to be able to finish up some big targets with the attack, followed by a transfuse that then heals their unit. So it's very rare to want to discard a transfuse. Like most of the time, you'll just get a chance to play them, you'll do it, and you'll get value out of it. Like you'll be getting some good value out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So this event, I would say, it's definitely above the power baseline. Right? We've seen that to deal 2 damage, the original baseline of direct damage with an event was with the Phoenix Elves, 2 damage, 1 card, move phase. You had to be like certain proximity with the summoner. In this case, you have the advantage of not needing proximity with the summoner, but that gets translated into proximity with one of your units, which is not hard to do, especially with all your melee units, which will just need that to even be able to do something. And then you're not only dealing 2 damage, you're healing for 2 for a 0 magic event. So we can see that this is giving you way more than a burn type of event would give you, for example. It's definitely above the power baseline. Then Death Right, I guess this is the only event that I find myself sometimes discarding one of them with the Crimson Order. Sometimes like you just draw it too early, or you just need the magic because you want to play some warriors and you haven't killed enough units on the opponent's side. So this one is a little bit more situational, meaning that not in every single turn or phase of the game you will always find value out of it. It's extremely strong. It's a great effect for the deck to have some unexpected tricks in which you're going to be able to be dealing more damage that they were counting on. And doing the destroy unit allows you to do some cool tricks like attacking through the same flank. Like you attack with melee with like Doom Cultist, you sacrifice it with a Death Rite, and then you attack with something behind. So it has a lot of things like that that it allows you to do, and it's very easy. That cost of destroying a friendly unit is not a big deal for this deck. You're gonna have a lot of cultists around ready to be used for that, or a damage unit. So it's a solid event. I would say it's in the power baseline. We have multiple events that allow you to do +1 on your attacks with other factions. And for example, with the Avens, the prerequisite is just the proximity to Ava, right? Like, and then you can get up to +3. In this one, the only requirement is you sacrifice a unit, and then as long as you have 3 attacks available, you get that. So it's a solid one. It's easy to get that +3 in a turn, which is what makes like one card out of that worth it. For one card, that's exactly what you would expect. Then convert. This is the event that I would say it's a little bit overtuned a bit. It's an event that has 0 decisions to make. Like it said, you will never discard them. And if you start the game with both of them, you can just play it, and then it's just gonna stay on the board until you need them or you want to use them. So I guess it's a little bit too powerful because you're able to just hold it until you can get the maximum value out of the conversion. I'm not sure if this was tested in any way in which you have to do it for the next units that you killed or something like that. But the way it is right now, there's no decision making. You will always play both, and then you will just wait for that optimum situation in which whatever you kill then can attack their summoner or then can take over a summoning gate spot. So it's extremely powerful, and it's another tool to keep bringing those devout cultists back, right? So then you get those other chances, those additional chances to get them back into your hand when they roll. So extremely powerful event. Definitely one of the strongest epic events that we have for factions. And finally, Call Forth. This one is also, I would say, way above the power curve. So in this one, we're setting up a standard of, hey, what's the cost of getting 2 units back? Well, that's just 1 damage on your summoner. So that could be more significant for other factions in which, like, the life of the summoner is a premium, especially if they have 10 life. But with Daimar, it's not so much, right? Because you're going to be healing a lot during the game. Every single attack will likely be healing you. So that cost for those 2 units back, it doesn't really feel like a steep thing. You're also trading like 1 card for 2 cards, right? So there's the balance to it. You get to bring the ones that you need the most at that moment. So you will never ever discard a Call Forth. Like would be extremely rare. Even if you needed magic, you could just play Call Forth to get 2 units back and then discard those 2 units, right? So you get 2 magic out of 1 card instead of 1. So all the events, as you can see, are extremely strong. Call Forth allows you to follow that strategy of outlasting the opponent, as you will be able to trade with all your units and then just keep coming back so that you're trading again with them. Very few decks are going to be able to win that attrition battle against the Crimson Order, especially because of this event is a big part of that.
Do you usually try to get at least 1 devout cultist per call forth, or is it very situational? What cards you're trying
Very
to
situational. Many times, like I would say, really the spread of what you get varies a lot from. You tend to get a little bit of everything. Like at least I'm going to be getting from the 4 units back. One of them was going to be a warrior. At least one of them is probably going to be a devout cultist. If you're running low on those, you usually bring one back to hope to keep the gravy train going with some more specials and getting it back. Sometimes you just need the priest because the board is in a position in which you're going to be getting a couple +1s. So yeah, it's all of them are good targets. So it's really depending on the board state that you pick.
Mm. No, nice synopsis of the events.
Yeah. So you saw like all there are no bad cards here. Actually, most of them are above the baseline of power. They have a lot of synergy between them. Like all of the deck plays perfectly between them. Like the events play well with most of like with the units with between each other. Even with the champions, um, champions with the events. Like everything has synergy. Like this is a perfectly designed deck. And the only thing I would say is that it's maybe a little bit too above the curve. Like there would be slight ways maybe to nerf some of those events so that it's not so easy to get so much value out of them, right? Like, for example, some just random ideas that I've read, right? Some very creative people like in the channels talking about transfuse, in which you could only either deal damage or heal as much as you dealt damage, for example. So if you only dealt one damage to a unit, you just heal one. Although because this is putting wound tokens on it, maybe it wouldn't work for that reason. With call forth, maybe like that could even probably sustain like you deal one damage to your summoner for each card that you're bringing back, right? Like maybe that would like it would still be valuable, but it wouldn't be like such a stroll in the park in which you're just getting massive amount of value for so little. Sometimes like you don't even care about that damage. Convert could maybe like, hey, when you play it, you're gonna be getting those units back, but they're gonna be happening on the next kills. Like it's not a you may. It's like, hey, whatever you kill, you're gonna bring something back. I mean, it would still be a great event. It would still be an event that you play all the time and you get value out of it, but it wouldn't be as punishing and as devastating when you're playing against them, in which they can just keep it around the whole game until that timing, which is just going to destroy you completely. Right. So these are just ideas. My point is that they're extremely powerful. This is the perfect faction to say A plus because it's not an S tier faction from the perspective like nothing is broken with it from like there's no way of answering, there's no way of dealing with it because they also have weaknesses. Like they have the weakness in which all of their moves are predictable, so you can plan around that. You like you know how far they can get, you know, and their main threat and the reason why sometimes people feel like they're overwhelming is if you try to go pound per pound just trading with the warriors, you will lose all like every single time. So many times you have to be playing to their weaknesses on the mobility. Or sometimes like, hey, if they want to use Daimar, there are some good factions that can punish that and deal a lot of damage to it. So once Daimar is hiding, like they have a hard time still being so oppressive and doing those brutal interactions with the warriors. So that's why they are not S tier. Like they don't have really any busted components that you can't deal with. Of course, some factions have a harder time exploiting their weaknesses compared to others, but there are ways of playing right against them. Like they play the attrition game, so but they're gonna give you a lot of magic because of that. So then you don't really want to discard anything. You play all your champions when you're playing against them. You play all your commons, and that way almost every faction is able to try to reach the end game and battle them all the way to the end. So it's not easy, of course, but the thing is there are ways around that, and that's why this faction is still balanced from that perspective. And they are indeed stronger than the usual A tier, and that's why I would call them like A plus most of the time. But yeah, they are close to that power baseline.
Adro. we can make an A plus tier just for them. Definitely A plus for right now.
No, but if we do that, we have to move
Oh,
a
true,
few
true, true.
others there. So
Okay, okay, we'll move it.
yeah, because at that point we would need to move like the goblins and all that stuff. But yeah, they are. That's the meaning, right? Like it could be either of them. The thing is, when you're playing with other A tier against them, you still feel like you have a decent chance. So it's not a massive difference between A plus. Like the difference is that you saw most of the cards were above the power baseline slightly, at least slightly. With the other A tier decks, most of them were just, hey, no, that's what you would get for that cost, and um, and that's it for the order.
Makes a lot of sense. A cool
All
synopsis
right.
of the Daymart. Should we move on to
Cool.
the
So,
Vargoth?
yeah, any thoughts? Any other thoughts on it, or otherwise we can move to the Varga.
Uh, no, just some tips and tricks, I guess. Like you were saying about transfuse, it's such a devastating spell. Not only, like you said, you can try to mitigate it by not attacking a unit, but then Daymar can attack a unit, or another one of their units can attack their own unit to then be able to use transfuse during their magic phase. So very, like you said, very versatile, potentially above the curve, or like you said, above the curve event. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
but yeah, it's one of those factions which I think is also very mattering the matchup you're playing. For example, like cave goblins hate playing against this faction because it's
Yeah.
very losable or like very unwinnable for the cave goblins. Versus other factions, kind of enjoy the fact, as you pointed out, that you have infinite or you have close to infinite mana as you can in Summoner Wars with all the cultists you're able to kill.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. You want to do Vargath next?
Yeah. Let's do Varga. So this is one of my favorite factions. I love the all the synergy in this faction and the fact that it's an offensive factions, right? Like most we don't have that many which are just this aggressive faction that is becoming at you. And I love the fact that this is not like an all-in that just rushes at you. Is this type of like a Roman phalanx type of formation that you build with your units, and then you start gradually advancing and just like moving everything out of the way and taking over the other side of the board. You see that it's interesting because let's start with Sundervid. You look at it and it seems pretty like a pretty simple concept, right? It's simply a 4 melee, right, champ, which is the standard for a champion that is a combat summoner, meaning one that is meant to be attacking a trading, and 12 life, which is the low end of a combat summoner. Like you see in combat summoners, they usually start at 12. A lot of them start have 13. Grognak has 14. I think Grog is the last one. And then the Swamp Orcs is an exception because they can heal. But yeah, so we can see this is the low end of a combat summoner with 4 melee. And then the ability is also seems pretty vanilla, right? Pretty simple. +1 to friendly units, 2 spaces away. So we can see here the part of the spirit symbol of it, of the proximity of playing together, of having that energy. And then of instant, well, we'll see. I guess the instant +1 also aligns with that. So a simple concept, but it's amazing how well it plays when you're playing them, how it gives you this unique feeling of the faction that feels like no other faction before them. So let's take a look at the champs. Start with those. In here, we have one of the best champions in the whole game. Varn is one of those that we've been calling must-play champions, in which when you play the Vargoth, you know that you're going to be playing Varn. It's very hard to find situations in which you don't. Usually it's just because you have it in your opening hand and you really need to play other units, so you just drop it. Or for specific matchups in which Thoradin is great, like it devastates those, like against the Forged, then maybe you forgo Varn because you need the 8 magic to play Thoradin. So, but other than that, like 80-90% of the games that you see this faction, you're going to see Varn, and that's just because of how powerful it is. If we see the stats, it just has the standard baseline of 5 magic, 7 health, 3 melee. But the fact that it can be attacking for 4 melee, which is a massive difference in champions, attacking from 3 to 4, it's a significant factor. Like if you're playing the Vargoth in the normal way, most of the time he's going to be attacking for 4. So that already puts him above the power baseline. And then the form up ability is extremely strong. It gives you so much versatility in the type of plays that you can do. It seems simple if you just see it, that you just grab a friendly unit and then like put it adjacent to it. But the key thing here is that it's in any phase. That means that you can be like moving brutes to be using the brute ability to ram something out of the way. You can be attacking with it and then putting a unit to protect Varn. And that's the main reason why he's so strong. Any summoner or any champion that has a way of attacking and then hiding or protecting himself is extremely strong because it's going to be really hard to get rid of them. So if that champion is attacking for 4, then that just makes things really tough on like dealing with them, especially if they're coming at you or if they're taking over your summoning spots with them, right? Like he can come in, kill something that is protecting your summoning spot, and then use the ability to put one of their mid shield units, one of their tank units in front. So there's a lot of type of plays that you can do with him that are like that. Another one that is very common is you kill whatever was protecting the opponent summoner, then you use the ability, you attack the opponent summoner. So you can see that there's so many ways in which form up can be used, and they're all extremely strong. So this is just one of the best champions in the game. Then we have Quen is a more situational champion because we get stats which are below the power baseline. We can see for 5, you would usually expect 7 life. In here, you're just getting 6. And then the attack value is just the standard attack value you would expect for that, which is 3. Although with a +1 for Sunderbed, attacking for 4, that kind of balances it out, although he's still really not above any power baseline even with a +4. The only way that he's usable really is when his ability is going to be causing a lot of mayhem on the opponent's side of the board. That works out for factions which are swarm factions, like the fungal dwarves, right? For example, in which there's going to be multiple units, 1 or 2 adjacent to what you're attacking. So then you can be getting a lot of splash damage. So he's playable, but situational, but still a very good like tool to have for those situations, right? So he's that type of champion that is great to have as an option, but not something you're going to be playing often because for 5 magic, it's an expensive proposition which can be brought down kind of in an easy way at only 6 life. And then we have Tordin, which is another situational champion just because of the cost. Whenever you have 7 or 8 magic champions, they're very hard to play. You do have to make significant sacrifices to be able to bring them on the board. But in this case, what you're getting for 8 magic is worth it, right? Like the stats at least justify that. You have 12 life, which is one of the biggest champions I can think of. The other one is Shonk in the Tundra Orcs. I think, yeah, well, has 11. So can you think of anything else that has 12 or more live on champions?
Not starting out with no, yeah. It's I think it
Yeah, even,
tree, but besides that, tree's a summoner, so not champion.
yeah, it's a summoner. Yeah, so I think only the monstrosity has something like 13.
Let me check.
Yeah, might be the only one. So Thoradine, it's another situational champion that in some matchups he's going to shine, especially on ones in which some of your other commons are not great, so you just want to like drop them, discard them, and you get decent set of abilities, being able to go over gates or go over units, which are also structures. That's the thing that sometimes people forget. So against the things like the sand goblins or the forge, he's great. He's able to just like bypass the front line and then just go and hit the summoner. Especially the attack is 3, just the standard that you would expect, the minimum, but still able to give him +1 with Sunderved more often than not. Being able to get those free damages from the trample are also significant, right? Because that way, even if you're only attacking for 3, if you're getting 1 or 2 the ping damage after going through something, makes him solid. So he's also a situational champion, but he's a great one. Like all of them are playable in different type of matchups, and you have one that you always want to play. Many times you really don't play Tordin because you want to play Varn, and it's either one or the other on the magic cost unless you commit to discarding heavily on commons or events. But all of them are great. So let's take a look at the common units. So we have first the tank of the deck, and this one it's a perfect term for him, like a tank. That's the way I see him. So for 2 magic, baseline unit stats of 5 health, 2 melee, has a positive ability and a negative ability, which is common when the positive ability is very strong. it's something to common to have, right? So he can only move one space, but whatever is adjacent to it when the move phase, you're going to be forcing and dealing damage too. So this is the unit that allows the faction to have this thematic feeling of overwhelming and crushing the fences of the opponent, and so that they're not able to really stop you and you keep advancing closer and closer and taking over the position. So it's a key card, and the disadvantage of slow, you can overcome it with some of the synergies you have with other cards. So even though, yeah, it's makes it a little bit harder to use, but there are ways of getting around it. So this is a solid tank unit. This is the only two magic unit of the deck. So the lineup of units is on the, I would say, probably on the average, cheaper side of it. But if we see what they do, let's take a look at the color. So the color is the perfect example of a meat shield, I'd like to call it, a defensive unit, in which the base stats are, for one magic, the base stats tend to be 3 health, 2 attack. So in this case, you have less attack, more health. So this unit like this would be kind of useless even with the ability. But if you remember the +1 of the summoner brings it into a above baseline set of stats so that you're attacking still at 2 like you would do with a 1 magic unit, but also you have more health that you would traditionally have. And that's, if you're playing the Vargoth properly, most of the time your units aren't going to be having that bonus. So he's going to be like a 4-2 if you want to tell like how it's going to play. It's going to play like a 4-2 that also allows you to move your units on the after summoning or whatever they are. You can force them one space and do something with it, which has massive synergy with everything that the deck is trying to do and with the theme of the proximity to the summoner. So I would say this one is around the baseline or slightly above, just because it's a good one. It has synergy. It's a perfect unit. Same thing with the brute. Something that I didn't mention is that even though you have 5-2, it's going to be hitting as a +3. So the key thing with all the units is that once you're getting the +1, they will all be above the power baseline. If you don't have the effect, they're still a lot of them are not bad. Like the brute is just like a normal unit for 2 magic. Hits like a 5-2, nothing wrong with it. The color, it would be slightly below the baseline without the bonus, like as a 4-1. But with a bonus, it just goes all the way slightly above the baseline. So that's the key thing. All of them with the bonus are above the baseline. So fighter, similar thing with a fighter. We have the traditional stats for 1 magic, which is what I was saying, 3 life, 2 melee. Extremely useful ability. Like that is a very strong ability, especially because if you notice there, it can force anything, like even the summoner. Most of these effects that force things, they don't apply to the opponent's summoner. This is not one of those. So this unit allows for some like unexpected combos on the summoner in which he hits them and then moves them into the range of another of your units or one of your range units, and suddenly you're throwing 10 dice on the opponent's summoner that they didn't anticipate, especially once you combine it with Call of Arms from the caller. He's going to be attacking as a 3-3, so that's above the power baseline with the bonus. So similar pattern, right, with all of these ones, right? Finally, the Slinger. If we look at the base stats, like they are below the power baseline for a range unit. For 1 magic, you would be getting 2 life, 3 attack. So without the bonus from Sundervet, it's below the baseline. Once you add that, it's at the stats baseline, but the ability is extremely useful and has a massive synergy with the rest of the deck. Being able to attack through the friendly units is exactly what you will want when you have the meat shield of the caller, when you have the tank of the brute that is going to be moving forward, and the second line is going to be the slingers. which are going to be attacking for 3 most of the time. So it's just the usual attack that you would want there. My guess is that they were tested at 3 base range at some point and they were completely busted. Not sure if they were really tested, but if they did, they
Yeah,
were
for
probably completely busted. And even at 3 range, which is just the traditional that you would get, the fact that they won't be able to attack it back most of the time makes it an extremely strong unit. It's the only range unit that they have. You start with one of them, but the fact that it will be able to attack over and over, you feel like you're really not running out of range units because of that permanence of the ability and the synergy of coordinated shot with the rest of them.
Mm.
All right, so then the events. Let's see if these ones have the same type of synergy with the rest of the deck. The first one is one that allows you to have Sunderbed in the middle of the action. Many times in factions that rely on a lot of melee, your main opponent, like your main weakness is the movements, the limitation of only 3 movements. So this event helps you to overcome that temporarily for one turn, giving you the extra move. It also gives you the extra attack, which allows for some devastating turns in which you could just wipe out everything. And not only that, you're getting +1 strength. So it's definitely paying for itself, like making the fact that you're spending a card, if you're getting 5 extra dice on it, is just an amazing event. The key thing is really you need to be able to also get the attack out of it. I see people sometimes only using it for the move, which is a little bit of a waste. But I understand how sometimes if that extra move is going to give you like a kill shot or something like that, it's still a good use of it, right? Of course. But if you get 5 extra dice outside of the 3 good attacks, then they're going to have a hard time dealing with that. So this is a great event. It feels really balanced. You want to play them uh, most of the time, really. Like it's only when you're in a situation in which Thundervet cannot really attack that you sometimes discard them. Then ramming advance. This is a very situational effect because you need a specific board state in which there is a space between yourself and the rest of the cards of the opponent. So whenever you're already advancing and you're in the middle of the board, many times ramming advance would be like, yeah, I don't really get much out of this one, and you will discard them. But just the threat of it being in the faction always forces the opponents to be having to play in a certain way, always worried about it. If they're playing really all the way back defensively, this is a big threat to them. And it's also that type of event that gives you a +1 on your attackers. It's hard to get the maximum output that you want of any +1 event is be able to get +3 on that turn. So this one requires you to be able to like have 3 lanes in which you move that way, which most often than not, like you will not get the 3 movements that way. It's only a 2, maybe sometimes even just 1 when you get a really good attack out of it that's gonna create a combo with something else. But it's an extremely useful card to have around, especially when you interact with some of the other events. Like it has great synergy with things like Stronghold, in which you're going to be retreating and then ramming advance allows you to go rushing all the way back into whichever spot you had driven your opponent back into. So it's a solid, great situational event. Then we have martial forces, which would look like a simple event. You will simply be grabbing like a unit from one side of the board, putting it somewhere else next to the summoner. But it's exactly what this type of faction needs, right? Like when your summoner is going to be in the middle of the action, when you want to be able to attack with a summoner, this is what you need to be able to plug that flank after you attack so that the summoner is not left exposed. But it can serve so many other purposes. Like you can be killing the defender to then bring something to the front to attack the summoner. And if that something is a fighter, that fighter can be moving it so that then something else attacks it afterwards. Like there's all of this synergies in this deck that just makes it one of my favorite decks. Like I think this is one of the best designs, like very simple, very elegant design for this faction. So it serves a lot of purposes like that. It also helps you out with those brutes when they fall behind because they're really slow. then the martial forces can be the thing that to bring them back into the action, and then do many of the other things you can do. So it's just a perfect tool for that. It costs you 1 card, so it's not a cheap effect for something so simple, but it's just exactly what the deck needs to be doing those very oppressive type of game plans that you're going to be putting together for them to really be able to close the deal, right, and not leave your summoner exposed, so that all of that offensive was not sustainable because the summoner was the weak spot that they just nuked him 3 attacks on a single flank. With this type of effect, you're able to attack with the summoner and then not leave a single flank open. So extremely useful. And finally, Stronghold. I love this because sometimes when you're trying to be aggressive, you try to establish some type of offensive position, puts like plant forward gates, but they just hit you really hard and it just didn't work out. And now you're overextended and in a bad spot. So the deck has an option to be able to go back to the middle, get your summoner. If they almost killed you or trapped you on their side of the board, then you can just escape and then just try to play an economic game from the back with the rest of your units. Or it just allows you sometimes to be reckless with your turn. Like you can just overextend and do some wild attacks with a champion and Sunderbed, some throw a lot of dice and then just go back to the middle with it. So it's a great event. It's sometimes situational because there are just some board states in which it's not going to be useful, so you're going to be discarding at least the first. But it's just that exactly what this type of deck wants. This is the type of tool that the deck wants. So going over the whole deck, you can see there are no bad cards. Same thing with the Crimson Order, right? Like all of them are playable. None of them are really busted by themselves, but once you play them like with the synergies of the deck and play it all to interact with each other, that's when they are extremely strong. And that's why I've always considered like this faction, it's a A tier, close to A plus, but not as overpowered as the Crimson Order. So I've always just called it, this is a perfect A tier faction that is able to beat any other faction, right? Like if you set up like a good game plan, get average rolls, like the Mountain Vargoth is one of those decks that can defeat anyone. Like it has the means of overpowering anyone because once you're getting the bonuses on your commons, all your cards are going to be above the baseline. And I love it that it requires that skill of all the positioning and the movements of being able to set up the pressure, but still keeping a safe formation for the key cards of it.
Yeah, no, very good analysis. Yeah, like you said, Mount and Vargoth are definitely one of my favorite factions in the game, as well as I think a lot of people's, just because you have this mix of a formation-based faction, which is also, you can do some super creative moves with, like you said, ramming advance, battle leader, martial forces, Varn, Torridon, fighter, like having a brutal force basically on a unit. You can force your own units, you can force your own summoner, you can force their summoner. Just lots of really cool plays you can do, and a lot of creativity, which I think is one of the reasons both of us enjoy Summoner Wars. Just the expression of creativity you can have with a deck like Mountain Vargoth.
Exactly. Yeah, this is, in my opinion, one of the most enjoyable factions to play. Like, it's one of those that I can keep playing and I never really just get bored of it. Like,
Yep.
yeah. So, and this is second one that pair that was the end of the golden era
Of Summoner
Summoner
Wars
Wars, right?
releases.
Because before this, like there was all of that. I think it was wave three,
Mm-hmm.
right? In which we had all of them were extremely balanced. Like all of um, see,
It was
like we had just back to back like almost all of wave three. Let's see if I take a look at wave three is the sand goblins, the obsidian dwarves, which the obsidian dwarves are really also perfect. The thing is, they rely on luck a lot, and that's why they were in the A minus. But they don't really have any issue with the design or with the strength. Like it's one of those that can play as an S tier if you get like the specials going your way, or can't play like a B tier if the specials don't really go your way. So that's one of funny things with those. And then yeah, we had like the swamp orcs, the high elves, the wayfarers, the shadow elves, all of them. Like there were no bad factions there. So wave three was amazing, and then this other two were the continuation of that wave of whatever was happening in that era. It was amazing. And then we start with then the deep rogues
Came
came,
out.
right? Like, but the good thing is that we don't have to talk about all the horrors of the original version of the Deep Wood Rogues because it looks like they're gonna get fixed, and there's an adjustment to the summoner card that seems to be working really well. So we're gonna be analyzing them with the adjustment, which is very likely the version that we're gonna be having in the future. So let's see what we have here. So Hekatia, we have 12 health or range summoner, which is what you would expect of a combat summoner, right? When they have four or attack, they tend to be combat summoners that are meant to be trading. When they have three, they tend to be support summoners that they are just helping out the rest of the faction do what they need to do. We can see that the first ability lines up with that idea of being able to be attacking with a Hekatia because you're going to be getting boost out of it. And then you also have the ability of moving boost around. That seems like a simple concept, right? You're going to be grabbing either boost from units to Hekatia or the other way around. So far seems like a simple concept. The amount of life is it's not the full-on combat summoner that tends to have something like Balsar that they have 13, right? When they are their core is about combat, they tend to have 13. This one has 12, which makes sense because the core of the faction is not for Hekatia to be attacking. It's more for Hekatia to be playing with those boosts and brewing and doing things with them. But it does incentivize you to attack with her because of the momentum and because you have 4 range, which is a good amount of attack value that usually you want to be able to use whenever you get a good shot at that. So that's the principle of them. And the funny thing is that the adjustments to this faction were something as simple as limiting the arcane brew phase that you use it on. Before it was at any point in the game, the adjustment is only magic phase, and it's just mind blowing to see how much that changes the whole deck. Like it feels like playing a completely new faction when you can only do it on the magic phase compared to when you can do it at any time.
I completely agree. I think it's also surprisingly the nerf has increased their complexity, which is super cool to see. I never would have thought of
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, because now you really have to plan what you're doing. Before it was just so overpowered and just broken in a bad way that it didn't really matter if you plan things or not. You were just gonna, oh yeah, I have a ton of boost. Here is a 7 attacker, boom, I kill your whatever it was, right? Like there wasn't not much planning to be able to get those plays before, but now you really need to plan things around, and it's hard to see those busted attacks that don't require a massive amount of planning that would make you feel like, oh yeah, they or that don't doesn't give the opponent a way to try to play around that. So let's take a look at the champions. What we have with those. So we have the traditional melee champion for 5 magic, 7 health, 3 attack. With a great ability, the best ones that we see with the 5 magic champions, they either deal extra damage or they give you resources back. And those resources, if they're giving you cards from your discard pile in any way, that's equivalent to 1 magic, right? You can either use a card, discard it for 1 magic. So getting 1 card back out of every kill, it's a extremely strong effect, similar to what we saw with the Crimson Order. And this one is specific to potions, so it allows you to keep reusing potions or just getting more magic back. So it's a great champion. I play him a lot. I think it's the one that I play the most, just because it's the one that's gonna giving you the most back. Like it's hard to be beaten on a long game when you're getting cards back every time you attack. The key thing is that you want to make sure you play him in a protected way so that they don't kill him in one turn. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to end up losing on that economic proposition. but it's a solid one. So I would say it's a strong champion. Nothing crazy there. Then Eldarath. This one, having an option of a three magic champion, say it's something that gives the decks a lot of options. It's always just strong having that around because that means that it's going to be easy to play at least, play two champions. When you one of them costs three, that's what allows you to play two in a game. Otherwise, if all of them cost five or more, you tend to only be able to afford one in a game. This one, I think it's a little bit too strong, honestly. The fact that he's able to get a boost from three spaces away makes it extremely easy to just collect a boost from any unit that is around. And that's just for three because the stats are really the baseline that you would be getting for a champion at this cost. Like getting five health and three attack, those are great stats for just three magic, just by themselves, like the stats. And then acting as an insurance for all the units that you have around for those boosts to collect them, it's a very strong ability. Now that the deck, with the current adjustments to Arcane Brew, it doesn't seem that crazy, I guess. Like, I haven't really felt that he's too busted because it's going to be more uncommon to have those units with five boost on them being on the front of the board, which is what you used to have before with the Warriors, right? Like they would have five boost all the time. If they went out, it would be really uncommon if they didn't have five boost. And then they would use those boosts on that turn for a potion. But if you didn't have a potion with Eldarath, you wouldn't worry because then you would just get the five boosts back. But now that you don't have those situations, I guess Eldarath is a little bit more balanced because you can't really abuse, like you might be getting two boosts back here and maybe two other here, and then you need to get them out of him because before they kill him. So it's not that bad now, but he's still very useful champion to have. And finally, Kalik. It's nice that he costs four because now you have like that three, four, and five, which allows you against some type of decks. Like you could potentially play the three champions, right? With those costs, it's not unheard of to play all of them. This one is a little bit more situational because for him to be relevant, you need to have a lot of, well, a couple potions at least around. Because if we look at those stats, we are getting the standard amount of health for a four magic champion is six, but they usually get a little bit more attack. So you have below the power baseline on the base stats, but that's because the abilities will allow you to correct that. So the moment you have at least one potion, then he's closer to the power baseline as a 6-3. The moment you have two potions around, then he's slightly above. He's above, like slightly above the power baseline at 6-4. If you have more than two potions, then he's just like extremely strong, right? But that's the thing. He's slightly situational because you have the dependency of having a certain amount of potions. But once you do, like, he's just amazing. Like, he's because now he's going to be feeding you those additional boosts to keep bringing potions back, like, be playing more potions. So, this is an amazing champion. Slightly situational, but great for those scenarios in which you've managed to pull like two potions on the board, or you start with, well, you already had one, you play him, and then you're going to play another one, and then you start like amassing a lot of boosts. So all the champions are useful, as some of them situational, but they're great. Let's take a look at the commons. So the warrior is the traditional two cost, two magic combat unit in which you get three melee and four health, right? So that's not an uncommon set of stats. But the key thing here is that you have the capability of increasing that amount of attack for a very simple cost, just like adding boost to it. And there is synergy there with the Mystics, which we'll see the range unit, which in the same turn can be adding boost to it. So it attacks as a 4-4. That makes it like above the power baseline, right? So it starts with a baseline of a 4-3 with the advantage that it's going to have a boost on it for that attack because those boosts you can reuse for other things in the deck. So already there, it has the synergy. It's like a baseline stats with synergy with the rest of the deck, giving you some boost to use for other things. with synergy with other cards which can add boost to it. The most common one, Mystic, it's the one that you will see most often, like the Mystic putting a boost on the warrior to attack for a 4/4. So that just makes it a great combat unit. And then in some other less likely scenarios, maybe you can put some boost from Hecatia to just make it a monster and be attacking for 6. Right? You can be attacking mm, up to 6 and then up to 7 if you also use the strong potion of it. It's much harder to do now, but it's that's an extremely powerful event, right? So it shouldn't be easy. The cool thing is that you need to start doing synergies with things like the Warden, so that on the turn that it comes out, the Warden is protecting it, so that then you're able to add the boost at the end of the turn and then just blow something up. But still, you're risking 5 boosts on the gamble of if the opponent is going to be able to destroy it or not. So it's really fun to play this time, right? Because they have a chance to respond and they have a chance to stop it before you're able to hit so hard. So it's a great unit this way, and it's still a very strong unit. Even in the worst case scenario, that's the baseline for a 4/3 to magic unit. Then we have the Seer, which used to be, I guess, a unit that was hated a little bit. It was extremely frustrating to be playing against like the Grogs, and they would just immediately build like a couple Seers very easily on the back, and then they would just start destroying anything that was trying to attack. And now it's a lot much harder to do that. It takes a little bit more time. That's the key thing. Like when they come out, they won't be able to do those busted interactions. They might be able to do attacks which are a little bit unusual, like they are still on the back behind gates attacking something on the back if you make the use the mystic boost on it, right? But at that point, like that mystic boost is a very important resource, so you can put it on it, then you can use Hecatia the following turns, but at least you are giving the opponent a chance to keep the offensive and put pressure before you can start using multiple seers from the back, right? So it is still a great unit. If you look at the base stats, like even on the base stats, like it's pretty decent. Like you're getting your 3 health, 2 melee, which is the baseline for 1 magic. But then you're also getting 2 boost, which on themselves, like they're already useful. There's something you are going to be able to do with them most of the time. And then you have that type of usage of adding a lot of boost and keeping it on the back to be the support unit to finish things off on the front of the battlefield. So they have a lot of ways of using them. With those stats, you can even just get them on the front and just trading blows. And it's not a bad use if then you take the boost and bring them to Hecatia or use them for something else. So I think it's still a very powerful unit as like the warrior. Even in the worst case use of them, you're still getting what you paid for. And many times you're getting a lot more than you paid for when you start using the synergies of the other factions. Then the Warden is the traditional tank, the 2 magic, 5 health, 2 melee with a protective ability, which is the type of thing that this faction wants, because Hecatia doesn't have a lot of ways of protecting herself after attacking. So the Warden is one of them, so that they cannot punish you so easily afterwards, at least with melee units. Or it can be protecting some of your other important units, like the Mystic and the Warrior. And the other main use of the Warden is just as a boost generator. So the Warden is the main boost generator. It still triggers for other attacks on other Wardens. So that's a very strong effect. But it's not so busted now because Hecatia is not able to bring over to her that many boosts as she was able to do before. So now even if you have two Wardens, like one of them is going to get killed before you can get the boost from Hecatia. So many times you end up using the boost from one of the Wardens, that 3 or 4 boost for a potion, instead of having them being lost, right? So now you see a lot of different usages of the units that before they were very unlikely. They wouldn't happen that much. So just on the stats, you're getting what you paid for. Protect is a decent ability for a tank. and the boost generation is exactly what this deck wants. So this is a great unit for the deck, or what the deck is trying to do. And finally, the Mystic. So it's the only, well, range, natural range unit, because the Seer, in a certain way, it's also range. It has the traditional stats for one magic range attackers, which is 2 health and 3 attack. That's the least you would expect if you're gonna be incentivized to use them to try to attack and kill stuff. And the ability is simple, and it just gives you a boost for every attack you're able to pull out of them. So at least you're gonna be getting one. Maybe sometimes you're going to be able to get two, because they're going to be a priority target that they'll try to kill every single time. But that's when you try to use them with the wardens. That's when you try to use them with some of the potions to try to get a second attack out of them. And then that boost, it's always going to be useful, right? We already saw how it has synergy with warrior, how it has synergy with seer. Even when you don't have those there, it has synergy with potions that you have in play, because you can put the boost on potions. And even when you have nothing, because it's turn one, you can simply put the boost on Hecatia and then use it for a potion. So it's just an amazing unit. You're going to be playing every single one of them, just because of the synergy that it gives you. So all of them, as you saw, they're excellent commons. The thing to note here is that this is an expensive set of commons, right? We have a 2-2-1-1. So there are no zero cost units, and there are two magic cost units. So that's that's the expensive, on the expensive side of the set of commons, which is one of the complexities of the faction, of knowing how to play it, right? Like knowing is similar to the Avens, in which you need to make sure that at the end of each turn you always have enough magic for at least 2 units, and so that means you need to end at 3 or 4. So yeah, that's something to note out of them. Like, they're really good, but they're not cheap. But you're getting what you pay for. And then the potions. So Swift Potion, I think this is a potion that is way above the power baseline. I would say this one is overpowered.
Agreed.
If I was redoing the deck, like, this is one of the potions I would change, because the combination of what it's giving you and any phase, it's extremely strong. First, what it's giving you is the most powerful effect in the game. Being able to attack with your summoner and then hive, or being able to do multiple attacks on the same flank. So you can pull 3 attacks of the same flank with this card, plus being able to reach things outside of the normal range of movement. So that means they have to be planning around the possibility of a Swift whenever their summoner is low, or most of the time. And that makes things really hard when playing against a faction that out of the blue can suddenly start moving more than you would expect them to traditionally be able to move. So it's just extremely powerful potions. The most strongest one. This is a type of potion which could cost 1, and you would still always be playing them every game. Like, for what it's able, what it allows you to do, I would say it should cost 1. Either that, or maybe it could still cost 0, because it's, let's just call it the strongest potion of the deck. Even though it's not the epic, I would see it as the epic one. But then have some type of restriction maybe on the phase. It would allow the opponents to at least anticipate it, right? So that you don't have to be playing almost every single turn around that when you're in the advanced phases of the game, or your summoner is at half life or less. So, for example, if you make it magic phase, then it wouldn't be as busted. Like, then you could see it coming as the opponent, and then those triple attacks out of the same flank, then it would be your fault if you fall for those, right? Because you could see it coming and you can play around. But right now, pretty much, you mean you have to play around the thing the whole game. So many times you can't really take the luxury of doing your whole turn around the fact that they can play a Swift Potion. So this one is, a bit too overpowered. Then the Wither Potion, the funny thing, this is the epic one. So this one on poison. Costing 1 magic makes it really hard to justify, because at that cost, you need 5 boosts. Like, it's really tough to play them for less and not come out losing on the value proposition of the war of resources. So you're playing the card, you're also having to pay one magic, and then unless you have 5 boosts on it, they can get rid of it. If you have 3, they get rid of it in a single turn. You don't get that much value out of it. When you have excess of boost and excess of boost, there are times in which you're going to be able to afford it at 5. But right now, getting 5 boost with the current version of Hecatia, it's much harder. So it's even harder to pull this off. It is still usable against certain factions. So things like Wayfarers, in which they only have 3 attacks per turn, like there's no way of doing a 4th attack. They don't have other ways of dealing damage. They have a lot of melee units, so that means that their attack values are not that big, right? Like with the range units, like they usually have 3 AV, but attack value. But with melee, many times it's 2, and there's a big difference into turning a 2 attack into 1 and to turning a 3 range into a 2 range. Right? It hurts you a lot more when it's just a 1 attack value. So it still has some matchups in which you're going to be playing it, but it's hard to justify and you discard it most of the time. So I would just call it a situational card. I guess at 0 magic, it might be too frustrating in some matchups. I heard that they didn't want it to be 0 because what they call the negative player experience was really big for when you're playing against this, and it just kind of neutralizes your turns with the fact that this thing is in play. So I could see it being 0. Like I don't think it would be too busted, but I could also see it being true that it would be a little bit more frustrating when like some factions get significantly neutralized for a couple turns with this card being around.
Mm.
And then Poison Potion is a similar argument at 1 magic. It turns out into a very situational thing. Really, you're going to drop it most of the time. The only times that you play it is when the opponent summoner is at 1 life, right? So that way they cannot move again, or 2 life. Or against factions that have very low health, right? It's great to play this against factions that have units that have 1 health, because pretty much it means that they can barely play them. Like many times they won't be even able to play them, at least not for the turns in which this is out. Because of the cost, you really need to have 5 boost on it to be able to justify it in most instances. But it just becomes a very situational event. And the main reason is that they will be the ones picking which units get the damage. So it's very easy to distribute that damage on units in which it's going to turn out to be ultimately irrelevant. So if you play this and I have a 2 health unit that I'm going to send forward and it just goes to 1 life, maybe that damage it didn't really mean anything, because you were going to attack me with a 2 melee unit, and 70% of the times you're going to get a 2/2. So with or without that poison potion, like that unit would have been dead either way, right? So that damage really doesn't mean anything if you think about it ultimately in the game in a lot of instances. So that's why it's so hard to have this thing be useful, because they're either going to use it that way or they're going to be using it on their like tanky units. Like if they go to 5 or 4, it's still likely that you won't be able to kill them next turn and they're going to survive to be used once more. So that is why the usage of this one is most of the times when I use it is just so that they cannot move. And like the summoner has very little life left. Now it's stuck until it's able to drain all of the boost on the poison potion. So that way I can keep pressuring. So this is another weak event that I could see this one being 0 and the deck not be like too busted in any way, because they pick the damage. Like if you think about it, like this one is even weaker than the one that we're going to see right now, Strong Potion. Because Strong Potion at the end of the day, it's up to 5 extra dice, right? And each one of those dice, it's very likely that it's going to be equal to 1 damage. In a lot of instances, especially with melee, it can translate to 1 damage. And the difference is that, okay, not all of them will be 1 damage, but you're going to be picking when it becomes 1 damage. So the fact that you're able to pick which attacks get the bonus and which ones you don't really need it just makes it huge, because You're always going to be using it in those critical attacks in which you need to make sure that you get the kill, or you're attacking something really big, like a summoner or a champion, and the big attack values are going to be significant. So I would see, like, if both of them were zero, like strong and poison, I would still see strong as a much better potion, right?
Mhm.
So I can see the argument. Poison, it's kind of the cost of it is not properly costed, I would say. It's probably it's the type of event that would have made sense at zero, but makes it almost completely useless when it's one magic. It just doesn't justify what you're getting in return in 80-90% of the board states, and that's why it gets discarded very most of the time right now.
Mhm. Oh, great points.
All right, so yeah, so we can see that the faction has a lot of synergy, but has that dependency of Hecatia moving booster rounds to get those very strong interactions. And that means that it's a faction that wants time. It wants things to go as low as possible and wants to play defensively, wants to play on the back of the board so that you have time to start moving those boosts to get the most and the most power out of all those interactions. And that is not always easy to do, right? Like that's something that, again, some factions that are going to hit you really hard, it's going to be tough to maintain. And with the high cost, magic cost of the units, sometimes it feels even harder because unless you have a strong potion around, a lot of the units don't hit really hard. Like the Seers at two, the other ones at two. Like you don't have a lot of high hitters. Only the Warrior is the only one, and Hecatia, which there aren't that many defensive options for her. Like when she attacks, it's likely that at least they're going to be able to counter attack with a ranged attack. You can deal with a melee counter with a Warden being on the right spot, but it's you can't really use Hecatia too often. Like many times, you prefer just to use them as a support unit, and that's why it's a little bit tougher to play this faction now. Like you have to just be buying time, playing on the back, but still not allowing them to just clog your summoning spots because you don't have any non-conventional way of summoning, so you do rely on those. And but I think it plays really great. It feels like now you have even more synergy between the cards because now they depend on each other even more than they used to. And I would see this faction, I see it today as being an A minus. I see it on the A minus scale
Yeah,
when it comes. How do you
uh,
see it? Do you think it makes sense there? How what have you felt when playing it?
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think it's definitely is this interesting mix like we were talking about earlier, where I think currently it is one of the more complicated factions. Like I can see it up there with mapping how the game's going, with like the cloaks, the shadow elves, um, the high elves. Just there's a lot of decision making, mostly with how to distribute the boost. And to your point, that's one of the reasons why Wither and Poison are just not worth it most of the time. Is you have so many more useful decisions with the boost because unlike before, it's very hard to keep your because before you're able to move your boost before um, at different times during the turn versus now it's just during the magic phase. So a lot of times you feel boost starved, like you were talking about with before how Double Warden was so strong and now it's not nearly as strong. Um, I agree. I think due to just the decision making with the boost, how it, like you said, it's a faction which is more on the slower end. So factions such as Tundra Orcs or Wayfarers are more aggressive factions which are able to get in there before you're able to get a nice boost economy. Usually do very well against the deeper Groaks, um, as well as uh, just the high mana cost in general of their commons. So, like you were talking about, they have no zero cost. They have two twos. You always feel like you need to end your turn with, three or four magic. Um, so it just makes it very difficult. And sometimes you just don't have the opportunity for that. I completely agree with you that Swift Potion it's very broken, but at the same time, it's arguably for me the most fun event in the game. Just like the amount of creativity you can have with that one event, you can even protect your summer. You can attack something and then get a unit to block one of your sides of your summoner or block a gate.
Mhm.
Lots of really cool things you can do. Um, what else do I have written? Yeah, complex warriors. There's a lot of cool things you can do with warriors in terms of like boosting a warrior to 6 when you see your opponent has 6 or 7 magic and you're assuming that there's a champion. Um, Also, we talked a little bit about Kalak. I'm curious about your. Do you think Kalak is playable now, just because um, of the nerf, where now you kind of are a lot of times starved for boost? So Blood Bond, if you're able to have the potions like you said, um, make it more playable than before.
Yeah, I think it's I've always seen him as playable. Like even before I used to play him, whenever I had two potions out already, I
Mm,
would love playing him because the stats that you're getting there, they totally justify for a four magic getting a 6/4. That's significant. Like just for the stats, he's gonna be worthwhile. And the fact that you even get some boost out of it just makes it definitely worth it. I only don't play him when I don't have any potions yet. Like if I'm just starting the game and I get it at that point, that's when I drop him.
mm.
But otherwise, yeah, I think he's always been great. You just really need a couple potions around.
Yeah.
That's it. Like he's gonna be paying for himself. If he's attacking a few turns for four,
Hmm.
that's it. That's all you would want for a four magic champ.
Yeah, it's one of those also cool abilities where, similar to with, I forgot the same unit which has Blood Bond on OD. Even if you miss, but you get a special, you still feel good about getting a resource. Um,
Yes, exactly. And yeah, and if poison potion was zero, maybe the faction would get closer to A,
mm,
but maybe it would really still stay there because I think some of the weaknesses of the faction are not related to the fact that it has like a couple potions which are not as usable. It's more of the fact that it's pretty slow and it really relies on the gates to be able to develop like a good defensive. Because if they clog your main gate many times, like they can just get you that way, right? Like that will
yeah.
used to be one of the main ways to defeating the Grogs when they were just completely busted. They really depend on those gates, and they will want to have the seers behind those gates. So it's not that hard for them to be able to come in and start clogging your front gate and getting you in trouble that way. So I think A minus is a good representation in which it's a solid faction. It's able to like fight it out with most of them, but you do feel like you're slightly weaker against most of the factions, especially the ones that are aggressive. Because if you're playing against factions which also want to play on the back, you might even feel like, hey, you feel like stronger because now you're going to be able to abuse all of those like boost interactions and seers. But if you're playing aggressive factions like the Vargoth, like Tundra Orcs, it's easy to get overwhelmed by them
Hmm.
and just feel like you don't stand a chance, especially if you're playing the faction the way you played the Grogs before. Right? It requires like most of the things you used to do, you have to relearn them, just try to play as if it was a completely new faction,
Agreed.
right? Like you don't need to, for example, take the boost away from a warrior after attacking once, like the two boosts.
Hmm.
Before it was uncommon to leave a warrior with a boost because you would pump it up to 5 boosts and then remove them. But right now you can keep the warrior after the first attack, and if they kill it, like it's not a big deal. It was a 4/3, right, with two boosts. But the thing is, if you remove the boost, you end up with a 4/1 that becomes useless, and you pay two magic for it. So those type of things are the small ones, but they make a massive difference when you're playing. But yeah, it's probably even with a poison potion, it would probably be A minus. But I do think poison potion is one that should be zero.
Agreed. Do you think before the nerf they were in a tier of their own, or do you think they'd just be top of S tier?
I think before they were like double less,
That
like
was.
they were a tier of their own. Because even the S tiers, like you were really relying more on luck and
Hmm.
anything to beat them, or just hoping that the opponent would make mistakes. Because otherwise, if played to the maximum of like abusing those seers and the warriors, there was sometimes like no way of beating them. That was it. Like unless they never drew a gate and things like that, like you had no chance. And that was true. Like it was frustrating. Like a lot of people just walked away of from the game at that point. Like I stopped playing for multiple months
Mm.
because I just got tired of playing with the Grogs. And then I said like, well, I'm gonna be the one that play. I'm gonna play them myself and see how far I can take them. And then I just got bored. It was not fun. Like it was it's just not a fair battle. So it was like, this is, even if I'm winning, this is not fun because this is not a good like a fair battle in which we both have the same chances and it's let's see who outplays each other. It wasn't like that. So yeah, it was they were on a class on their own before, just on of how busted it was.
Yeah, no, to your point, I think it's similar to your criticism of cloaks right now. The problem is when certain play patterns are just way more, a lot better than other things. So in the case of current cloaks, moto boots plus hand cannon on a Mac or a machinist, it causes that to be the only thing you really want to do with cloaks versus, all the other cool things. Um, yeah, and same thing with
Yeah,
Grokes before the nerf was you'd want those 5 boost seers, you'd want those warriors, and everything else was optional at that point.
exactly. Yeah. All
Cool.
right, so let's go to the next one. So the Forge. This is also one of my favorite factions. So even though I think at this time the golden era finished, the Forge is the exception. Like this is just a mind-blowing theme, the sign of the deck. Like I find everything in it perfect, and it just feels so unique. Like nothing before played in the same way as the Forge plays, and it's all. Let's see at the. Let's take a look at the inventor. So we have the amount of life that it's the standard for a support summoner. So we see these very often on things like Ava or Kursk, all these summoners which are really just supporting the rest of the deck. They tend to have 10 life because they're not on the front line trading blows. And then the standard for a melee summoner is 3, right? Like they always start at 3. The only exception I think is Valeria because, well, she gets the engaged damage, so technically she hits like 4 when you're attacking units.
Mhm.
So the very common stats for support summoner, but the theme of the deck is the master builder, right? You're going to be building stuff and then dealing damage from the all the things you build. So you have that extra ping damage that you're getting from the summoner executing its theme of being the one that is building stuff around and going after the opponent. So he has to be building for the theme to be taking place and dealing that fortune flame damage, which it's a key thing for the faction to win, right? Like it doesn't seem like such a strong faction if you're not really getting those bonuses from that effect. So then let's take a look at all the structures that he has to enable those interactions. So the champions are all a little bit situational. And it's not that they are bad, it's just that the commons are so good, and you also have an expensive lineup of commons with two magic units and 2 1 magic units. So that means that you're going to need a lot of magic to be able to be playing that around, and that doesn't leave a lot of magic for the champions. But let's take a look at them. At a cost of 5 magic, we just get the base stats of 7 health, 3 melee. All of them, most of the units we'll see have heavy mobile, which just means they cannot move without taking damage. But this particular unit has a way of getting around that because when you move with turbo, you do not get that, you don't get the damage on it. It's going to be a straight line. That's the thing. But this is a great champion for unexpected finisher plays in which they thought that they already escaped, they ran like away, but then you move, build this, and then force this 3 spaces and do that final hit. And many times people forget about this champion, and I've gotten like a couple kills there that they just forgot that this was a thing. Most times, like when if they know the faction and they see you have 5 magic, they might be playing around it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a decent situational champ. I would say slightly below the baseline if you think about the stats because you're just getting 7-3. You tend to have a positive ability that is significant. Like the last factions we've seen, you saw how we almost get, like, if you get a kill, you get one magic back of resources or one card. In this one, you really don't get anything like that. All you get is the unexpected move, right? Like the suddenly you can force a unit you built 3 spaces, which it's I would say it's fair for this unit for this faction in which it has some limitations on the mobility. So this type of unit overcomes that and gives you some options in on that side of the game.
Mm.
Then the Helmo, which is probably the best champ in this deck, the one that I play the most, because just right off the bat you can see how we're getting above our baseline stats, right? Like it's usually 3. We're getting an extra amount of life here, which tends to be considerable for it to be able to, the chances of it surviving another turn to do another attack. Just has the standard attack value, which is what we would expect, paying 5. Has the disadvantage of the heavy mobile, but its ability, it's even more significant than the sprocket ability, because in here, just by attacking, we don't even need to kill something, and it doesn't even need to be a unit. We get to recycle one of our cards, right? So we're really not getting it back into our hand immediately. It's not a card that was discarded, but in many cases, you're going to be able to bring back something that was already damaged. So I would say it's almost as significant as getting like a full card back, because you're not getting it back immediately, but your opponent is losing 1 magic, and then you're getting something back that you will eventually draw and be able to reuse. So that's why I think he is the most powerful of the 3 champs. And he just plays perfectly well with many of the other structures and units for that recycling purpose. So it's, I would say, above the power baseline, right? Just out of the stats, it's great. And then the ability also gives you resources back, but also negates magic to the opponent. So that's, for me, definitely, I would say this one is above the power baseline. And finally, we have the Titan. This is the most situational card of the champions. He only costs 3, so that is, that's solid. That right there for 3. The stats you're getting, even though he has 6 health, it's more like 5 at least, 5 or even less, because once you bring it down, like to be able to use his ability, you have to move with it to be able to move something from one side to the other. So that means he's going to start really with 5. And that just puts it on the baseline for the amount of life you get for 3. And then the attack value is slightly lower than what you would expect. Like you would expect like 5 magic and 3 attack if it was meant as a combat unit. But it's meant more of a support unit in which the value that you get out of it is based on the relocations that you're doing, not that much out of the combat trades that you're doing. And really, you don't want to be trading with it too much, because you want to be able to relocate as much as possible. So you don't want them to be able to easily hit him back. Ideally, when you use it is with one of the events that prevents and negates that damage. And then it can really just be something that turns a game around and just creates a lot of really powerful interactions. But it's not that usual to manage to accomplish that stuff. So I don't see him being played that much. I don't play him that much. But I've seen the type of things you can do with the relocate, and it's a great champion to have around, just as a situational type of champs when you need that versatility against defensive factions that are gonna be just trying to run away from you, and you already planted your whole base in a certain area, but the Titan allows you to reuse some of those again in an advanced position. All right, so now let's take a look at the common units. These ones are more important. First, we have the Sentry Cog. This is a fixed unit that won't be moving by itself after you deploy them. We can see that the stats that we have here is the inverted ones on ranged units, in which you have, instead of 2 health, you have 3 health, but you only get 2 attack. And this one, like just by those stats, it wouldn't be great if we look at that. But the ability that it has gives you that extra attack value that you would expect to really want to use a range unit, because it's giving you that damage automatically. It's not going to be immediately the time you plant it, but whatever tries to attack it back. And in most instances, they'll have to eventually deal with it if you're placing it at some key positions in the board, and you're going to be getting the damage automatically, many times more than one. It's not uncommon to be dealing 2 damage with the preemptive fire, and at that point, it's going to be overperforming, especially because when they only try to do one counter attack, it's common that it's going to survive, right? Like it's going to only take 2 and then survive to get another preemptive fire attack. So this is a perfect unit. It's balanced. It's at the power baseline that you would expect for this type of effect. And once you add into all of these units the fact that you can be getting the Forge in Flame pings, they all feel even more valuable than what you're paying for, right? That's when the deck really feels strong, when you're getting not only what the unit can do, but the extra damage out of it. So then the Mag Cog, on that one, it seems like an expensive proposition, right? When you look at that, we're only getting 2 health and 2 attack instead of the standard 3 attack for this type of cost. So when that is the case, you need to have a very powerful ability to overcome that, to balance that out. And we do have that with this one. Like, this is a faction that is extremely useful in a lot of different situations. And against some particular matchups, like these guys are, they can really cause a lot of trouble for the opponent, especially when you're clogging their gate spots, when they just rely on their gates to summon, or they haven't drawn gates, and then the Mag Hogs with that ability to be placed adjacent to different units, you can be clogging their gates, or you can be attacking with them and then moving in back, right? So being able to hide means that it's able to attack more than one time, which the range units that have 2 health, it's not a luxury that a lot of them have. Like, they attack once and then they get killed. Like, that's the fate of most of this type of units. But for this one, being able to hide and attack again overcomes the fact that it's only attacking for 2, because the second time that you attack, that it's going to be left exposed, you already threw 4 dice with it, compared to the traditional 3 dice that you would be throwing with the ones that are the 2, 3, 1 magic ranged units. And so between those different type of plays and the fact that you can be clogging spots or just putting in front of another of your units that you want to protect, gives you a lot of versatility, and it's a very, very strong unit. But if you're just trying to summon it, use it 1 turn, and then it's going to die, then it's a tough economic proposition, and it's you usually end up losing those if you just use them that way. So I like it because it brings some tough choices. When using the Mag Cog, you have to really plan them well to get value out of them, and it has some great synergy with the other cards in the deck. And then the 2 magic units. So we see here the traditional 5 health, 2 attack tank unit with the disadvantage of not being able to move after you plant it, or it takes damage if it tries to move. But at least it can move, right? It's still a 2/4. It's not horrible. It's slightly weaker, but it has a positive ability, which is extremely useful for this faction. Being able to attack diagonally, it's extremely useful because you can be clogging the gate spots, but still be attacking something that would otherwise be out of reach, and you would have just used the unit just to block a spot. It gives you a lot of range on the attacks when they have to take into account the movement of the inventor, the diagonal build, and the diagonal attack. So it gives you massive range. So it's a solid unit for that purpose. And it's one that really, most of the games I play, almost all of them, maybe discard one at most when I need some extra magic to play the other common unit, the Blast 4 cog. This is the 2 magic combat baseline of 4 health, 3 attack. has the limitation, the downside of the movement, but it has an ability that can deal extra damage to stuff that is out of reach. So that just makes it extremely useful. I think it's balanced enough in the fact that it also deals damage to your things if they're within reach of that. So there are some tough decisions sometimes to make there, and it's not so trivial how to use them. But it's an extremely powerful two magic unit, really useful for this type of deck, and it's balanced pretty well, in my opinion, with the fact that after you use it for the first time, then it's hard to move and get another hit because even though it has 4 life, all they need is a 3 damage so that it cannot really move and hit back if they manage to do that in a range way. So a solid unit still. Like we can see that all of these units are solid. They have synergy with each other. They can be used in different scenarios. Let's see how the events look like. So first we have the coolant upgrade. And in my opinion, this is the only event in the deck that I feel it's really weak, that it doesn't really give you enough for one card, right? At the end of the day, even if it costs 0, you're already paying one card, which you could potentially discard and get one magic to use for something else. And I don't think this one does enough for me to really want to play it in 90% of the situations. Just getting 1 life, it's not that much, right? Like it's if it gave you 2 life, it would be different. And 2 life could be if you could put this on the move phase, you could be putting this on an Ember Cog or a Blast Forge after you summon it and then move it. So it's saving you one heavy, the heavy thing, the damage, and heavy mobile. And then you also get one more life. Like at that point, you already got 2 life out of it with a potential of one more if you move again. So at that point, I feel like I could play it, but at just a single life, I don't feel it does enough at that point, unless I'm playing it on a champ. That's because the champ, it's easier for the champ to be able to survive multiple turns. And if you know that you're going to be having to be chasing the opponent, I love playing it on the champs, but the issue there is that, well, you need to have them at the same time, right? Like at that time where you finally reach the 5 magic for the champ and have the coolant at the and usually you don't want to be holding too many cards for too long. Like if you have Helma but you cannot play it yet and you're gonna hold on it, it's harder to also hold on the coolant, right? Because you need to keep the deck flowing, keep getting commons to keep playing. So I tend to drop it unless I get it at the exact time that I'm also playing something like Helmo. And not sure if they didn't do it in the move phase because it was too strong if you used it that way. But I just find it too weak otherwise, and I discard it 90% of the time. Then the next one, Barricade, is just amazing. Like it's because you're going to be using it. The fact you can play it in the attack phase, so that means there can be some situations in which the inventor attacked something, and then you plug that hole after you kill that. That you close that flank, or you moved forward and planted things diagonally, and then use this to block like one of their summoning spots when you're running to a gate and then want to block like both sides of it. But one of them had a unit. After you destroy their unit, you take over that spot. So there are so many uses. You can use it offensively, defensively. It's 5 health, so that means that if they want to bring it down, they're going to have to spend a few attacks on it. And just from that perspective, you're getting a lot of value. And if you're getting the ping damage from the inventor, which most of the time you're going to be getting at least one, then it's a great card that I always want to play both of them. Then we have the modular upgrade. This one is a complete different story. Like I always play both of them. Gives you some extremely powerful plays, some like multi flank attacks, in which you plan something, then that unit gets the modular, and then it shifts places with something behind it. So for that thing to attack again, like if you're attacking the summoner, I also love using this. You can use it on the 10 gate, right? So we've seen the mega gate with the sand goblins that it's moving and putting pressure. You can do something similar with this and the 10 gate. And then when you start advancing with the inventor, You have a unit on the front, it attacks something, and then the 10 gate shifts places, and they cannot really attack that unit again. It's still not as easy to do because those things on the back, unless you stay there, they can start falling behind. But it's an extremely powerful event that it's hard to not find enough value of the situation that you would be using it to just want to use it, even if you're doing it on the 10 gate, even if you're doing it on an Ember or Blast for cog, or you can also use it on a Mag cog. It's a great way of repositioning your whole structure of units. When you do it on the Mag cog, then the Mag cog does the thing in which it gets attracted to the front, and then you do the modular so that the Mag cog is protected, and then the thing that you move forward so that it starts advancing across the field is now moving forward, and that's the shield. It's still a risky proposition in many matchups, so it's not as easy to do. But when done well, like it can really give the faction a lot of mobility, which is their main weakness. And finally, the workshop. So this is a structure that doesn't cost you any magic, and it has 3 life, meaning that it can go down fast if you leave it in a spot that is kind of unprotected. But most of the time, it can take at least 1 hit, so you can use it just to get some bonuses and then buy some time because they're gonna have to spend 1 or 2 attacks on it. And yeah, you're getting like those +1 strength on a turn, right? We've seen that the ideal scenario for 1 card that gives you this effect is when you're able to get +3 in a turn, so the 3 attacks with a +1. This one, because you can be planting it and get the pings from the builder ability, it's already giving you some free damage there. And then it's still going to give you a couple. Usually you want to get at least 2 of the attacks out of the workshop. So it's an amazing card. You usually play both of them. I would say it's definitely strong. For the type of events that give you +1 on your attacks, I would say is one of the most powerful, definitely above the baseline there, because most of those events, they're just a one-time thing. You're going to get it this turn. But with a workshop where you place it properly with a big unit in front, they won't even be able to attack it afterwards. So you can just keep abusing that +1 over and over and over again for many turns. So definitely one of the strongest ones of that type. So yeah, the Forge. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's honestly. I was talking about how complicated deeper grokes are. Forge are definitely, I think, one of the coolest factions, like you were saying, to ever be released. Just so unique, as well as just like so complicated in terms of like in a good way. It's like a faction which I feel like to get good at, you do have to play a decent amount with it. And the amount of like very cool combos, it's almost impossible to calculate. What they can do if they're in your face, especially if they have double modular, Titan, Magcog, Embercog. It's one of those decks which I wonder if we had instead of 1,000 people on Discord, we had like 10,000 people playing the game, or more than that, like the player population of, for example, Magic the Gathering. Whether there'd just be some players who just specifically only play Forge and just are incredible with it. Um, I'm curious whether. So I don't. Of course, I don't know where you're going to put them in your tier list. But when you were talking about Sprocket, I do think maybe Sprocket could use a buff of just maybe it doesn't need heavy modular, ready for 5 cost. I think it would still be 7/3 with turbo. I think that sounds still fine. Or do you think that's too busted?
You mean without heavy mobile?
Yeah.
Or well, that's kind of the theme of these strong machines.
Mm.
It wouldn't be too busted because it only has 7 life. So if you think about it, it would be really more on the baseline there, in which you get like 7/3 with a positive ability. But I guess because the extra movement on this faction is something that is supposed to be a premium, like something they're not supposed to be good at, because
Mm-hmm.
that's the way it gets balanced, right? Like they are extremely good at a certain thing, at hitting you really hard and coming at you like a train, but they're not supposed to then be able to move easily after that initial blast in which they come down into the board. So yeah, I could see if didn't have heavy mobile, it wouldn't really be overpowered or anything like that. But because it has turbo to overcome the heavy mobile, I don't
Mm-hmm.
see it as such a big issue that it has it, because most of the time Turbo is going to be able to like you were going to be able to get where you want to get with Turbo. So
Mm.
that means that you don't need to move, so you don't take the damage.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, it's not the purpose of the card to stick around really at that point. It's usually like you said for assassination or for yeah. Um,
Mhm. And even after the first attack, like if they move or something, you can just use the turbo to move and like reach them, right? So you're not really you're forcing, so that means you're not getting the heavy mobile damage. But the
mm.
thing is, when you use turbo for that assassination, you're usually overextending, and it's easy for them to kill him on one turn. So that's why many times he's only useful when you just need like that last attack to finish them off. Otherwise, it's not a good economic proposition. Sending him over all the way, overextending himself, and then just be surrounded on three flanks and killed in one turn.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I agree with you though. I think the if there's one change to be made to buff this faction, I think coolant has to be maybe they I wonder if it was just busted or whether it's just theme based. The build phase makes the most sense for an upgrade, but yeah, it's definitely
Exactly.
weaker. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, not sure what it was, but yeah, that's the card that I think is just like I think when you have a card that you discard 95% of the times, there's an issue with it, right? Like because you
Yeah.
want to like a good card is a card that you want to play. That it's like, oh man, I can't wait to play this card. Like this thing is gonna allow me to do what the deck wants to do. And coolant is really not that. Like the way I see it, if I'm playing coolant in a Ember cog or a blast for cog, I'm just setting myself back on the economic battle of resources. Like that's just gonna be setting me back. And because the deck is really magic hungry, you need a lot of magic to keep bringing those machines and keep that momentum because it's a very aggressive deck. I always find myself preferring the magic compared to just getting like +1 life on that unit that it could still be killed the next turn, right? Like you do a 5 health blast for cog, there's a chance they kill it that same turn. I mean, it can survive once and move, so that means that they gave you another life. But I don't feel like I'm getting enough value if it's just gonna give me like one move and one life, and that's it.
Mm, that makes sense. Do you think this is similar to what you and Davud were talking about? Is this a faction which you think is more flexible in terms of game plan, or a faction where majority of the time you're trying to rush at them? Um,
Yeah, I think it's that. It's not that it doesn't have that of a flexibility there because you really need to be very aggressive and very fast and be rushing them to get the most out of what this deck can give you. The more time that you give them, the better prepared they're going to be for you and to punish you when you're coming at them. And most of the power of this faction is that rushing with inventory in which you're going to be getting the forging flame damage. If you're trying to play like a range type of battle, you're losing all of those one damage pings, and then those cards don't really feel as strong when you're not getting those two. So it can play a little bit defensively. Like I've managed to do that in some specific matchups in which rushing in is like suicide. And then yeah, like it can also play that way, and it can have some success, but it's not easy, and it's not how it plays at its best. So that is the main reason why I position this one as an A level and not A plus or anything else, because its main downside is that it needs the inventor to be in the middle of all the action. So even though you can advance in a safe way, always keeping your flanks open, there are a lot of factions that can attack through units, that can attack through the same flank, so kill something and deal damage to you, that can deal damage in other ways other than attacks, that can assassinate you in many ways. So even though it's a very powerful faction, it has a lot of very tough matchups against those type of opponents, and you don't have a lot of flexibility of playing it in any other way. You have to go after them in those cases. So yeah, but it's a faction that it can like take down any other, right? Like when you
mhm.
get some good momentum and go at them fast, and they don't get like gates quick or something like that, like you can just finish the game before it even starts. So it's definitely at an A level here. Like they are very strong.
Yeah, no. The more I look at this list, the more I really, really like it. I completely agree. I think, as you were saying, the main thing is you feel like the S factions are just there's a big gap between A and S is basically the what you'd fix with balancing.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. Like ideally, I wouldn't even want to have any single S tier faction, right? Like those could be slightly balanced in some ways, tweaked without really affecting the identity of the faction, but be brought into a more like range that is a fair fight that they cannot just avoid some broken interactions. And with
Mhm.
some of them are it's hard, right? Like I think in the past videos we've talked about like the Shadow Elves in which like none of the cards by themselves are busted in a way that you say like that's the problem with that card, and it's hard to know how you would balance them because for example, the first thing that came to my mind was bringing Celendar to 4 attack value instead of 5 because if you see all the other summoners with range values, like they tend to be 4. Like the only other 5 is Abua, and that's the one that they've been talking about nerfing, changing that one so that it's weaker and sending it to 4. It
Mhm.
seems like having 5 range on a summoner, it's something really maybe too strong. But for example, there are other things like you could simply do that the Onyx Tome is not able to bring back the 10 gate. So that way you only have the Into the Darkness to recycle your 10 gate because the deck needs to be able to recycle that as part of their theme. And just making that tiny change, it would really change the type of things you would be able to abuse of getting like the 10 gate over and over and over and over like 3 4 times, right? And
Yeah.
there are small things like that that could be done to be balancing it out a little bit more. With the other ones like cloaks, it's easy because it's really just a broken interaction they have there. Like if you fix that, even though it has wildly overpowered cards with dagger and the bandit, which are like just the bandit is the best zero cost unit in the game just because what you're really getting is something that you would traditionally get for a one magic unit. Same
Mhm.
thing with dagger for 4. But even with those, like those could stay, and the faction would probably be more on the A plus with the simple change to the gun so that you cannot put it on a machinist and you couldn't just keep it on the corner. Or if you do it, you're only getting 6 dice out of it with blocks instead of 8 dice, right? So
Makes
there
sense.
are easy ways to fix stuff. Like with Avua, I think if they just bring it to 4 attack value and they change the starting setup,
Mhm.
the deck becomes still strong, but maybe it gets it out of the S tier.
Yeah, I agree. As you can see with frogs, sometimes just the smallest things can cause powerful factions to become balanced, and even sometimes, like we were talking about frogs, it's more fun to play, um, funner play patterns. I know a lot of people in chat are super excited to hear our thoughts on or your thoughts on the Fae, but I think that'll be next time. um,
Well, wait, isn't the two
oh,
next ones are
true.
part of Wave 4 still? Yeah, so we
Oh,
have
let's do it.
two
Yeah.
more. Yeah, the Filth and the Chosen Grove we won't be doing today. Those are part of Wave 5. Yeah, we're gonna do the last ones.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
All right, let's go. So, and there goes my hopes of. I thought we were gonna be able to do it in an hour and a half, and it looked like it's gonna be a 3 hour again.
Oh, that's a lot of fun.
I
No, I don't mind.
Okay, nah, neither do I. But I just I try to make things like I think that I'm trying to summarize and just make it quick, but there's still so much to cover that it's hard if we're gonna do an in-depth overview of them.
No, definitely. These
Okay,
are, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Can you give me
okay,
1 minute?
yeah, yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
let me just get some water.
Can you select Nimira? I can start just talking about
Of
Nimira, and
course.
then you can. Okay, so let's take a look at Nimira. So this is everyone get ready. This is the sad story of the Shimmering Fae. So it starts with Nimira. So she's supposed to be a combat summoner, right? But she's a combat summoner that only hits for 3, which is something you'll notice all the other ones tend to hit for 4 or have a way of dealing 4 damage. She has a way of that, but it's a way that is hard to accomplish and most times don't doesn't really last for too long. So for most of the game, 80% of your attacks, around 80, they're going to be with 3 melee. So it's a combat summoner without a combat stats from that perspective, and she's on the lower range of the life totals. So we've seen with the other ones that it starts at 12. At least she has ways of healing back, so that was probably how they landed on that amount because you can most of the time be healing a few points back. So as long as you have ways of protecting her, like that would be a good amount. The key here is that, well, because she's a combat summoner, you expect to be attacking with her, and that's what triggers this ability of having boost to then be able to use for either attacks on other units or healing. And I guess maybe they thought three was good because once you after the first hit, technically you can move, deal 2 damage to something, and then do the 3 attack. So that would make her kind of as a like a 5 attack. But the thing is, if you're doing that, that means that you're not healing. And that might be one of the key reasons why it's like she gets killed really fast because um like after a few, she doesn't really have many ways of protecting herself after attacking. And after a few attacks, when you're at like 6 life, something like that, you want to be healing, but then that means that forget about ever doing damage to something, and then she's just hitting. She just feels like a 3 attack value. So right out of the bat, like she doesn't seem so problematic. If we look at her, if I was gonna redesign her, like I would probably just do 13 life. I wouldn't change her much because it is true that when she's able to heal, you cannot be doing something like 14 or anything like that. But most of the time, a lot of instances, you're gonna wanna be doing damage with her, so then you're not gonna be healing. So the attack value is also not that big of a problem because of the events that you have. We'll see that the core problems of the faction lie elsewhere, not that much on Nimira.
Mm.
One of them has to do with the starting setup, which we haven't really been talking about starting setups, but when you look at the one for the Fae, it doesn't make a lot of sense. As many times you don't really have any good plays you can do with it on the turn one. You have one of those scouts that can't really reach anything. Nimira is on a side that she won't also be able to do anything. It feels like it was just they try to do a very bad starting setup for Nimira, like very bad from them that it's hard to get a good start just because of how devastating they could have a start if they had high tide. Right? Like I guess it's hard if you have the traditional setup with them and they have a hand with high tide, then on turn one they can just be clogging the opponent's gates and killing everything. So it feels like they were on purpose given a very bad setup so that they couldn't have like a broken turn one. But maybe there were better ways of dealing with that. So let's take a look at the other cards, which we'll start seeing probably a pattern here. So whenever you're back, we can.
Yeah, I'm right. I'm back.
You're back. Okay,
Mm.
awesome. So let's take a look at Corrales at the champions. So we see the usual stats: 7 and 3 attack, and so we expect a powerful ability, right? Traditionally, it gives us resources back or something really powerful. But if we see these, all it's doing is moving an enemy back and then moving Corrales back. I guess maybe the first time you see this, you think like, oh well, that could be useful, that could be fun. Like try to think some scenarios in which that could work out. But in practice, it almost never really pays off. If you're shifting Corrales forward, then you're many times overexposing him, so he doesn't have a lot of life, and you paid 5 magic for him. And in a lot of other instances, you won't even be able to push anything back because behind the unit that you attack, there's going to be another unit, there's going to be a gate, there's going to be something. So that means you're getting just a vanilla 7-3 that does nothing in like 70% of the times, 80% probably. I've rarely, in all the games with the Fae I've played, maybe once I've been able to get some value out of his attack and pushing something. In the other instances that I end up playing him is just because I had the magic and it's just like a 7-3 that does nothing other than being a 7-3.
Yeah.
So this is way below the curve and probably one of the worst champions we have in the game. Then the sisters are these are good champions, especially the deep water leader, deep water, because it's the only real like decent defensive ability for Nimira. So the stats for a 2 magic in here It's usually it's 2/5 for common units, but this is a champion that has an ability that allows it to have recursion. So it wouldn't make any sense to be a 2/5. It would be completely busted. 2/4, it's reasonable in my opinion here for something that can recur. And the ability, it's the Guardian. I mean, it's not too powerful, but it's useful for what the deck wants. So you attack something and then you teleport, you get out of a dangerous area maybe, and then you're covering one of the flanks of Nimira after she killed something. So this is exactly like the synergy you need in the deck. And she's probably the best champion that the deck has. Then we have Inara. This one is a little bit weaker just because of the type of ranged attack. We have the 4 life. It's also reasonable for 2, but then just having 2 attack makes her kind of useless really for combat. The most of her use is going to be the turn that she comes into play. You're going to get 4 range, so that's solid. Like you're getting above average type of stats for that single turn. But then she's only going to be more of a mid shield that is enabling some of the other champion relevant effects on the deck. The fact that she has recursion makes her solid. Like you're going to be able to get that double attack, that 4 range, maybe another time at least, maybe 2 more. So I think she's like a solid champ, not a great one that I want the whole game. Like the Lyra, I can have the whole game and I'm happy with it. I can keep bringing her back. With Inara, maybe not that much, and I just have her as an enabler for the other bonuses that we have. But just because of the other synergies with champions, like you always want to have at least one of her. And I think the stats and everything here, it's makes sense. She wouldn't be able to have 3 range because then she would still be good just with 4/3. Like she would actually be the usual common there, but then with the +2 on the turn that she comes down, she would be a little bit busted.
Mm.
Well, I mean, if she could attack twice, it would be 6. That would be
Yeah.
crazy, especially once you think about the fact that she would be coming down over and over. So maybe if she was like a 3 health, 3 range, could make her more powerful. But I think the way she is right now, it's good because she's simply not a combat summoner by herself. Like she's also more of a support unit for all the other synergies with champions. So she's a good champ from that perspective. So let's take a look at the commons and see how those play out. Because the champs, they weren't that bad if you think about it. Like only Corrales was horrible. The other 2 champs were pretty decent.
Mm.
So if we take a look at the Swarm. So this one, we find something unusual here because, well, for 2 magic, we tend to get either 5 health or 4 health when we have like 3 attack value. In this case, we only have like a 32. Actually, this base stats is what you get for 1 magic. Right? So then we would expect something really special from the abilities. We can see that we get a 1-time second attack from it. So the turn it comes down, it can attack for 4. So on the attack value for 1 turn, it would be slightly like above the baseline of the for 2 magic. And then we have Morph, which in a certain way, it's it could be a benefit, right? If you're bringing back something that was damaged by the opponent, then you're getting some value out of it. But if you're bringing back something that still hadn't been damaged, then you're losing a little bit of the economic value. All right. So, yeah, the Swarm, we can see some of the weaker side of it after playing the deck for a bit. My guess is all it really needed is having 4 life, and then it would have made sense.
Mm.
Right? Because at 4 life, it would have been on the health baseline for a combat 2 magic common. That the first turn, instead of getting 3 melee, you get 4. And the price to pay for that is that after that, you're going to get only 2. But it's still going to balance out because usually from those, you get 2 attacks. They are meant to survive 1 turn, and then you get another 3 melee, so you get 6. So that would be the concept of this one, in which the first turn it gives you 2, the second one it gives you 4, then 2, and then it dies. So it's still balanced out from that perspective. And then the Morph, is something that could be either a positive or a negative. If you bring something damage, it's a positive. You deny them the magic. That attack that they did was meaningless. If you have to do it in something that has full life, you're losing magic that you had already paid. So it's one of those like pro and cons depending on how you use it. So at 4 life, it would have been perfect, but at 3 life, it's really something that it just gives you a tempo boost because of that quick attack you get, but then you're going to be losing on the economic side of the battle, of the fact that you end up with a 3 health unit that's going to die pretty fast and you pay 2 magic for it.
Mm.
Then we have the Oracle. This is a unit that it's I guess the weakest common. That one of the things that I learned to play the deck to its I guess to its greatest strengths was just discard all of them really. At most you keep one. These are ones that I jokingly like Shampoo used to call them like these are the squishies. I see them as the like squishy toys for the dogs that they just chew and they just do noise. Like they just come down and they just give magic to the opponent and die immediately. They really don't do much because even though for 0 magic you expect to have 2 life and really 2 range, when you have those range units, they are support units that give you a useful ability for the deck, for what the deck wants to do. And in a certain way, in some scenarios, this can give you that when you want to do that quick big play and you needed that extra 1 magic or you're digging to see if you get lucky to get something powerful. But more often than not, you won't really be getting something useful and you'll just be discarding some of the other bad cards. And then you're left with a unit that can't really do anything on the board other than like do maybe a 1-2 damage and then just give the opponent 1 magic that they're going to be using for something better at what you really got out of it. So this is the type of card that you really discard almost all of them. Like you just drop them. Maybe you play one if there's a very particular scenario, but it's a useless card really. Like don't even know how I would redesign it because what it's giving you is just not useful at all. I guess like something that is not very conventional that I thought at some point was like, well, this deck really lacks defensive capabilities, like having just some staying power on the board. So what if the Oracle was a 4 life 1 attack value? Right?
Interesting.
Like even if it has 1 or 2 attack value, it's useless for offensive purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But if it had 4 life, then you would be able to use it just as a meat shield, just as a like protecting the flank of Nimira, or something that is like absorbing hits and then getting transformed by the swarm, right? But at least it's able to take a hit because some of your other units they just die that same turn. So it's rare to even get that opportunity to do morph with a swarm, with an oracle, or with a scout, or many times even with a tidebreaker, because they're gonna die that same turn at 3 health. The tidebreaker is the only one that sometimes survives at 1, and then you get some nice plays returning them with a swarm. So let's take a look at the tidebreaker. This is the one of the commons that I don't think it has any problem. Like this one is designed properly for what the deck is trying to do. It's giving you the average, at least, stats for 1 magic, 3 health, 2 melee, and it has a positive ability that is a slight positive. Like it's not like nothing out of the ordinary, just rush, which gives the deck another dimension, at least, of having some options for extended range, because it's a deck that is trying to be aggressive, coming at you, trying to assassinate you quick, swarm your side of the board. So rush is really useful when that is your game plan. But that would be too little for like a unit, right? To be saying like, oh, that's my positive ability. So then we have that other ability that is something that if you fulfill this condition, you get a +1, making it a 3/3. So that means that it's hitting above the power baseline. When it's for 1 magic, a 3/3, definitely above the power baseline. So it's an extremely useful unit at that point. And we can see that the condition is controlling one or more champions. And this is one of the problems of the deck. We'll see that this effect and many other effects need one or more champions on the board. So we have only 3 champions in the whole deck. One of them is completely useless and costs 5. So it's really more like we really just have 2 usable champions on the deck. So those are the 2 sisters. So the deck, to just be able to operate and function as you would expect it to be able to be strong, needs to draw one of those cards. So if you don't draw them, then the deck doesn't really stand a chance. Like you're gonna have a just a barely usable 3/2 that is just this vanilla unit that can barely trade, and it's out of your control really. Like the if you don't draw the other champs, you just don't draw them. You can't do anything. So that's one of the main weaknesses of the deck. The other one is the Scout, which is one of the key cards for the whole theme of the deck because it's the one that enables you to reuse the champions. So after one of the sisters they die, so they go to the bottom of the pile, and then this ability Dredge brings it back to your hand. So this is the key of that champion engine. And then a part of the theme of summoning out of phase is where we have also Cold Reformment. So this is the key card that enables the theme and the interactions, right? Like you're going to be attacking and then summoning out of a gate that you just planted on that turn, or summoning out of a unit that already attacked and then you use Swarm. So this is the most useful card, and it has just the standard stats that you would expect because you want to attack for the effect. You need at least 3 range for it to be useful in that attack, and you get 2 life. So many times you get a one-time effect from them. So you have at least 4 that you're gonna get during the game. You have a potential of 4 sisters you can bring back, but many times you really have to play one of them before a sister has been killed because you haven't even drawn the sister. So many times it's less because of that. So, but still, the design on this one is solid, and it's the enabler of that engine of the faction. So the units, we only really have an issue with the Oracle and the Swarm, right? Like the Scout and the Tidebreaker, they're solid. I think the greatest problems start when we look at the events. Let's take a look at them. Spearhead, which is probably the most useful one compared to the other ones, gives you a +1 to bring your summoner into what you would expect of a combat summoner. And it also allows you to attack diagonally, which can be really useful to get into some protected positions, but still being able to attack. The condition here is that this only works for a single turn unless you fulfill the condition of having a champion on the opponent's side of the board. The issue here is that many times it's even hard having a champion because you haven't drawn it. Like it's on the bottom half or whatever. So if you have a spearhead and you use it for a single attack, then just getting 1 extra dice of an event, it's you're losing there. Like you're losing resources heavily if all you're getting is +1 out of it. Sometimes I guess if you're attacking from a safe spot and you also get the diagonal, there might be some more merit to it. But otherwise, it's something you never really want to use unless you find yourself in that position in which you have that champion and you have it on the opponent's side of the board, which is not a simple thing to do in many matchups. Right? Especially because the way to play against the Fae is that you're going to try to bring the battle to their side and not allow them to even be on yours. So it's not an easy condition to fulfill. The fact that when you fulfill it, it can stay there forever for the rest of the game. It's one of those things in which it's going to be either completely useless or just carry the whole game away with it, and you're going to just win because you managed to fulfill that condition for a long part of the game, and then Nimira is a real danger. So the problem with this card is not the condition, is the fact that you have no way of even having that champ in many parts of the game, sometimes for most of the game, right? So the only way to fix all of this hard dependencies would be to have one of the sisters as part of the starting setup. So that way you're removing that variability, like you're giving them a chance to always have that unless it gets killed, and then you have to do that battle of bringing it back, and then you still have to bring it on the opponent's side. So even if you started with it, it's not like you will automatically just be spearheading your way into victory. Like they can be dealing with killing it, and then you lose that spearhead completely, even if you bring that sister back. So this spearhead doesn't have an issue. It's the issue is the dependency on the 2 sisters, that it's out of your control when you get it. So on the starting setup, I think this would get fixed. If Lyra was part of the starting setup, then instead of the Tidebreaker, right? So, and that's something some people would say like, no, that it cannot be done. They have already announced that one of the new factions in the future is going to have a champion on the starting setup. So, of course, it can be done, and this could be the way that we fix that dependency on of this deck, of that interaction with the theme of the champions. If one of them, especially the one that is the one that allows Nimira to get into the combat and protect at least one flank, is on the board, then Nimira would immediately be able to jump into the combat and start participating and being a threat without overexposing herself to massive counterattacks.
Should we talk
Okay,
about?
so it only gets worse after this. Now, waiting. So all these events that we're going to look at, they're almost like automatic discards, like extremely circumstantial events that for you to find the scenario in which you're getting the value that you paid for it, meaning one card, is going to be very unlikely. So most of the time, you're just going to drop them. Like not even consider them. It's an automatic discard that you just see it, you drop it. So the first one is the for Nimira and the 3 units around her, 3 spaces around any unit, they can only be attacked once per turn. Well, guess what? I only really want to attack the scouts once per turn. I only want to attack oracles once per turn. Many times the tidebreakers, I only need to attack them once per turn. 3 melee, I got my big unit goes, kills him in one turn. So it's not doing absolutely anything for those. Even the swarms, like there isn't any common that is like a unit that you would really need to plan your turn in a way in which you're attacking them twice. Only Lyra and Inara are the ones that could potentially benefit, in which if they had 2 flanks exposed, they will only be able to attack them once, and then it's unlikely that they kill them. And Nimira, it's a similar thing, really. When she's coming forward, unless you're just rushing and leaving 3 flanks open and using this, you might not really be getting much value because all that they will be able to do in most board states is attack her back through one flank because that's all they can reach. Through the flank that you attack them, you kill something, and that's the flank that is exposed to a counterattack. So most of the times they will only really want to attack you once. So without a limitation how much damage they can deal, this is useless in a lot of scenarios in which now they're going to attack you like 8 a range or like 5 melee back or things like that. So it doesn't really do much against a lot of factions. Actually, it doesn't do much against almost every faction. Like this card could get fixed in a couple of ways. Like one of them could be they can only get attacked once, and no more than 2 damage could be dealt to it. We couldn't do no more than 1 maybe because we already have an effect in Vanguard that is doing that for the first attack. This one could be, it would be just more powerful than the other one if it was up to 1 damage, but it could be up to like just 1 attack, 2 damage. Okay, now you can plan around this event and just send Nimira in a position in which you know she won't be dealt more than 2. Another way that would be my preference is one of the dependencies of this deck is that it also needs gates to really be able to do its theme of invading your side of the board and planting gates and then doing off-face summons out of those gates that same turn with the scout attacks. So you do have a heavy dependency on the gates. Not drawing them just can completely negate your offensive capabilities. So this could get turned into one of those gates that have 3 health, right? Like the Avens have 1, the Swarmborgs have 1. They could have 1 so that you have a total of 5 gates, and it's really easy to be drawing a gate. Well, it's much more likely that you're going to have at least 1 gate to get that strategy started. And it could be a gate, 3 life gate, that its ability is that anything that is adjacent to that gate can only be attacked up once that turn, right? So having that on a gate, it would be worth having because the value really comes from having the gate itself. Like whatever you're getting on top of that is just like the cherry on it. So those are just a couple ways in which this could be useful. Other than that, right now, this is a card that I discard like 95, 98% of the time. Then Rebuke. This is another one that I discard, I guess, 90, 95% of the time. Is one that it's only useful if you're going to be dealing that last damage, like when you're going after them and you manage to do a good offensive and deal some heavy damage on the summoner, and now they're hiding and they put a unit in front, and then you happen to have the rebuke, and then you do it and go there and finish them off. That's the only scenario in which it is worth playing this card. First of all, it doesn't even allow you to bounce a unit that is diagonal to Nimira. So for some scenarios in which you could use this to try to deal the last damage, unless you're already adjacent to the other unit, you won't be able to do this and then move Nimira into the position to attack. And then it will always be a losing proposition from the economic side if you look at it. So you only want to use it for the tempo that it gives you. But if you have to spend a card on it and then have to spend the magic cost that they paid and they get the card back, they will always be coming one card on top of you on the economic side of it. So it's extremely rare to be able to use this, only for that killing shot most of the time. And I think it could be fixed easily if you do something like just making it have a fixed cost of one, right? If you just cost one magic, then you could even use it on two magic units, and then it would be a neutral proposition there. Like you're losing your card, you're paying one magic, they invested two magic on it, but they're gonna get the card back, right? So then it's even at that time. So if you do it on a three magic unit, you're gaining some value, similar to Into the Darkness, in which Into the Darkness, it's amazing because on whatever you use it on the opponent, you're always gaining value on the economic war battle. Like as long as you do it on a two magic unit, you're always gaining. If you're doing it on a one magic, you're coming off even there. It's kind of even, right? You will never do it on a zero unit unless you're just attacking and killing the summoner afterwards. So something similar could be done with this one, right? Like you just make it one magic, and then that's it. It's a card that you want to play more often because you're just getting some at least economic neutrality to it, and then the tempo you're getting on the board is worth that neutrality. You're not losing resources when playing it. Finally, High Tide. So this is a card. It's the epic. It's a expensive one. Like you're paying one magic, so you expect this to be extremely powerful. But if you analyze it, all you're really getting is one boost, and then moving everything forward, which can be useful in some very specific scenarios, like when the game is starting and you want to close the distance as soon as possible. That's when this is useful. But then many times when the board is developing, all your units or your gates, there's already something in front of the gate, there's another gate. So you cannot even force things forward. You cannot force almost anything that would justify paying one card and one magic out of it. The boost sometimes could be useful, but in many other times it's irrelevant because Nimira, once you have the first boost, most of the time you want to keep like moving and using the boost, attacking again and getting another boost. So if you have at that point 3-4 boost, it doesn't make any difference unless you have to start like running away and you just want to keep using it. Because the way you play here is that every time you're trying to get another hit so that you're always consuming. So that boost sometimes can be useful, but some other times not even that. Like it might not even make a big difference. And you're paying one magic for that. The force effect, also very circumstantial there, situational. So for an epic card for a one magic event, it's very underwhelming. I end up discarding most of them. At most, I play one if I have it early, and it allows me to just try to do one big unexpected play in which they thought they were out of range, but then suddenly with this and a gate, you're making a massive play. But some other times, if you don't have the gate for that big play and the scout ready to attack, it's not even worth playing. So it's hard to know how to fix this card. Like I guess a way in which there could be more scenarios in which it's useful is if it would allow you to either force forward or backward. So that way, whenever they clogged your gates or they planted a gate in front of your advanced gate, you could kind of open up that position again so that now they have to worry and put a unit there, or you could like now summon something out of it. It could give it more versatility to at least be useful. I've heard some people say that this could be a tutor type of event, like the term from Magic the Gathering, in which you go and search for a card in your pile. The disadvantage of that is that it loses some synergy with the sister effect of being placed at the bottom, because if you look for something, you have to shuffle. But I guess that could be like the downside of it. But this could be a tutor of a gate, right? So if you don't turn the other event into a gate, a 3 gate, you could make high tide also give you the option of searching your pool for a 5 gate, and then you would be getting that other component that the deck needs to function from it. But without that, most of the time, really, it's just better to discard it and use the extra magic to try to play more of the units and set up. Really try get more, play every single one of your other units and play the sisters multiple times, because that's the key of winning with them. The more you play the sisters, the harder it is for the opponent to keep up if you manage to get the most out of that recursion. So that magic for that purpose is better than just doing a high tide that really gives you like a gate moving forward and a boost that might or might not be relevant.
I really like your change to high tide. Yeah, I think either going back or forth, or like you said, shuffling or trying to get a gate from the deck and then shuffling the deck afterwards. Those sound amazing. And I completely agree with your points that the problem with this deck, or the problems with this deck, seem to be twofold. One, some of their commons, of course, are not adjusted properly, like Swarm and Oracle. As well as you can't guarantee, just due to the nature of a card game, that you will have gates and champions, especially only because Corrales you're not going to be able to summon early, so it has to be either Lyra or Enra in your starting
Mm-hmm.
hand. Um, so I like your suggestions a lot. It is an interesting deck though, because like similar, I guess, to Cave Goblins, it does seem like if your opponent has just the right cards at the right time, and they have the right events for the right situations, it can come off as very oppressive and strong. But majority of the time, that's not going to happen, and so you end up in this position where, at least I put it as one of the weaker decks of Summoner Wars. Uh, yeah, I think
Yeah.
the one exception actually to Rebuke is in the current in Massimo's league currently. Rebuke is just exceptional against Fungal Dwarves early on. Like if you're able to get a carrier to the bottom of their deck and they didn't draw any, like it destroys their engine. But yeah, it's just so situational against one deck, right? That's not that useful. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, that's probably the best use for that card. Like that's the only matchup in which you're gonna use both
yep.
on that boosted carrier. Like that's it's hilarious doing that.
That's a very fun
Yeah.
matchup. Um,
But that makes this deck. It's I mean, it's a bit of a tragedy. It seemed like a deck that was so close to being right and so fun to play. Like that's the most frustrating part. I really find it extremely fun to play. But the thing is, with all the broken parts, it takes out some of that fun. But if it was adjusted, yeah, it would probably be one of my favorite decks. Like if you look at that, what we saw right now, one of the champions, one of the commons, and three of the events are completely useless. Cards which are
yeah.
almost automatic discards. Then one of the other commons is underpowered, like clearly below the power baseline with the swarm. And then the other event is also below the power baseline because it has a requirement that is really out of your hands many times. And it's not easy to do. Like having a champion on the opponent's side, even when you find them early, it's not trivial to do. And then after you do it, and if you have a spearhead, they're gonna do anything in their power to get rid of it. So
Mhm.
it's still not super easy to maintain for like the whole game. They're eventually gonna deal with it. So it's a good event, but it's still below the power baseline because of that requirement. So that really leaves us with like two champions which are solid, two commons which are solid, and one of them, the tiebreaker, it's subjective because he's only solid when you have the sisters. So there are some parts in the game or some hands sometimes in which the sisters are at the bottom, and then half of the game the tiebreakers are just barely like below the baseline because they're a vanilla unit that meaning like just the core stats of 3 health, 2 melee, and that's all you get, which is nothing to be excited about. They can pay you barely trade. So that's why this deck is a disaster. And sadly, this is a C tier. Like, yeah, if there was like the face for a C tier, it would be the Fae. I mean, if we had another tier, I guess if we had a D tier, that's where we would put them because I mean it feels bad having the goblins next to these other ones. Like the goblins don't really have any bad cards outside of the eater, right? That champion. So yeah, it's all but we already put them there. No need to change. Like there's a good argument for to have them there, and the same thing with the Fae, right? Because it has some powerful interactions. If you get like an early high tide, an early gate, an early sister, and then you go first, and then you can just steamroll the opponent, and they can say like, I don't know why they say the Fae is bad. Like this was, I didn't even stand a chance. Like you will always have one of those. It's gonna be like one out of every 10 games or something like that, but it's rare to be able to do that, and it's really because of the inconsistency of having such bad cards. And even if you were able to do that more consistently, having like 5 cards in the deck that are useless is just a design problem to me. Like those are cards that if you, I would rather have a deck that is consistent because all cards are usable and you want to play them because they're helping you get where you want to get, than like you be able to do that with half of the deck, but then the other half you just discard it because you know it doesn't do anything and you just prefer the magic to play the ones that work.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, it's just kind
All
of sad,
right.
like you said, just because
Yeah,
they have so many cool combos you can do, so much cool stuff, but it just yeah, it's hard to get to come together and just yeah, if you don't have the perfect draws and the perfect hand and the perfect matchup, it just doesn't. You feel useless in a losing battle.
exactly. You know, at least the hope I would say is that they're so bad that I would say it's likely that PhD should do something about them, right? Like
Yeah.
even all the stats everywhere that they have, they always have them as the lowest. So why wouldn't they do something for it, right? Like they've done that for Vanguard, they've done that for Phoenix Elves. I think they could do that with the Fae. The problem with the Fae is that they usually just try to fix things with the least amount of changes so that they only have to like reprint like 1 card or 2 cards. That's the most they've done, like with the events when they change events. So it would be hard to fully fix that deck with just a couple. Maybe, I guess, if you, the least amount of changes would need to address first the starting setup,
Hmm.
which that goes on the Nimira card, right? So if you change Nimira, you could give her like 1 more health and then change the starting setup. Then the other issue they have is related to the champion. So that's easy because you're already changing the summoner. So then you change the starting setup and you put the champion there. And then that's solved because those give you recursion. Now all you need is another a scout or the other sister, and then you're always going to be able to keep doing the theme of the champion recursion. So then we've only changed 1 card there. Then the only issue is around the reliance on gates. So if you change the that event for the 3 gate, the one that was the name of that event,
You mean
wave
wait
in.
in? Yeah.
So yeah, if you turn wave in into a gate, then you're fixing both the gate draw thing because with 5 gates compared to 3 gates, the odds of you drawing one on the first 10 cards increases massively. And then you're also fixing at the same time the event that is useless, right? Like
Hmm.
wave in now would be you would always be playing those gates, and then that effect of only being attacked once, like it could be useful in some situations. So just with 3 cards, you're already fixing the gates in the situation. The summoner, you're making it slightly more powerful, and the champion reliance with only 3 cards. That's only yeah the 2 events that you're like reprinting and the summoner. So hopefully they are willing to do something like that, like changing wave in into a gate. I guess it's a significant change, but unless you do that, if you don't fix the gate reliance situation, I think the deck wouldn't be fixed. High tide, another way of fixing it will be making high tide a tutor. But I think with wade in, you're also fixing wade in because that's the most useless event. High tide could still at least have some uses. There are a few scenarios at the beginning of the game in which high tide is powerful. So I mean, ideally they could change multiple other things, but if they just really need to keep it to a few cards, with those 2 cards, you're fixing the deck.
True. Yeah, no, I'm excited. Maybe next Plat Hat, if they have changes to the Fae, you'll have to make another appearance, Vexer.
Yeah, I guess at that point it would be worth reevaluating them if they make changes on that one.
Should we go to one of my favorite factions, the Storm Goblins?
Yeah, and let's wrap it up with the Storm Goblins. All right, so this is a very interesting faction that has like a very well-defined theme that it always plays in a certain way, right? And it's a very polarizing thing that it either just completely wrecks some factions, or well, a few other ones are not too concerned. But I liked it. I mean, just because with so many factions, they'll start to have to start being creative and just the key thing is that each faction needs to feel fresh from the perspective, the theme that when you're playing it, you want to feel like you're doing something that you had never done before with other factions, right? Like you're trying to accomplish something unique and that it doesn't feel like a rehash of another faction and that plays exactly in the same way. And yeah, like this is the perfect example of that. So the whole concept here revolves around circuit. So if we take a look at the summoner, we can see that the stats that we have are the ones for a support summoner. That is just 3 attack without really like a concept of making him stronger on the attack basis, and 11 life, which is I would say the high range of the support summoners, right? Like they start at 10,
Mm-hmm.
and then they some of them have 11, especially when they have to be getting closer to the action. So it's a perfect amount of life for this type of summer, as he will have to move forward. But the idea is that he's never really just openly exposed. Like he's supporting the rest of the units and trying to be in a relatively safe position. The whole concept is that you're going to be building circuits, that is adjacency between units, that will allow this unit to just do 1 damage to everything on that path, including its own units. But your own units are going to be benefiting from that in some instances, and the opponent not so much. So, yeah, like the concept is pretty straightforward, right? Like you know what you want to do, and let's see if the faction has the elements to be able to do that. On the champion side, it's interesting. We have a 4-4-4 lineup. That's very uncommon. This might be the first faction actually that has something like that,
I think so. Yep.
because we always tend to have one at with 5.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, Braca. The first time I saw Braca, it blew my mind. Like, wait, it's able to move 4? Like that just seemed so busted to me the first time I heard about it. But then after playing it, it plays okay. Like it's balanced enough. It makes sense for the symbols that it has.
Mm-hmm.
That you have a unit that is able to move like that. Thematically, it's also awesome. Like it fits really well with the concept. And because just being able to move 2 more wouldn't be like too exciting. It would be just like a 6-3 that just moves 2 more. Having that extra lightning ward gives it a bit more. It's pretty cool that you're not hurting him too whenever you're doing those circuits. So it's able to have a little bit more of permanence to at least stay for 1 turn and then be a threat again. The stats, we have the traditional one really. For magic, you get 6 health. That's just the baseline, and then you get 3 melee. So it's right on the baseline with a positive ability that it's pretty cool. It plays well to what the deck is trying to do. So good champion. Then we have then this dude. Same thing with the stats. Those are the base stats for a range unit of 4. You have 6 health, and then you have 4 with a positive ability. Many times, these stats on a unit is something that is a conditional extra attack to be able to attack for 4. In this case, instead of that conditional extra attack value, you get a 1 damage that you can do automatically to one or multiple things. The cool thing about that one that many times we all forget is that it can uh, go through that sap that it's doing, can go through gates. It doesn't matter if there's a gate in between, because circuit, it kind of like gets broken with the gates, right? But not bottle lining. So this is a situational champion that really only plays well when you have a very crowded board, because you want to at least have a couple units, the opponent's units there. I mean, with one, it's still usable if he's going to be able to be at a safe spot and get a relevant attack. But really, the value comes out when you have like two of the opponent's units because he doesn't really hit that hard and he gets damaged by circuits. So if you think about that, like he's gonna come out and have 5 life when he goes to the opponent's side of the to the opponent's turn. So there is a chance they could kill him in one turn unless you keep it close to your side. But if you keep it close to your side, it's harder to do the bottle lining unless there's like a very crowded middle of the board and then he's on one edge and you manage to do it that way. So it's a cool champion, like still usable, still situational, but that's how champions are supposed to be, right? Like there's you want them to be really good in one particular scenario. And then E6. So similar thing with the stats, 6-3. So nothing out of the ordinary there. You would expect a positive ability with those stats because he's not really focused just on combat. And Lightning Pool is one that it's the times I played, I haven't played like this faction like too much compared to other ones. So I haven't been able to use him that much, but I've seen how some other players use ESIC. And it seems like a very solid champion. Like the way they move Thrak around and just shift the focus of the game from one side to the other really quickly. Has the downside that it's hard to protect him because circuit damage is going to be hurting him, and you always want to be doing that circuit damage whenever, when you're because you're always going to be trying to connect with the opponent's side of the unit. So I find it a little bit hard to have scenarios in which I can use him effectively, but I've seen a lot of players who seem to have learned how to abuse him a lot, and they just get a lot out of him. So I would still say slightly situational, but very useful. Like all the champions are solid in particular scenarios. All right, so let's take a look at the commons. So all of this one should be playing around circuit, right? The ones that you're going to be seeing a lot. And the engine for circuit is the bolt swapper. So you start with one of them, and wait, you start? Yeah, you start with one of them, right? I think on the set. Yeah, you have
Yep.
5 of them. So, and these are the key units to form those circuits. So, are the ones that are going to be coming back with the recursion, and all you want from these ones really is you want them to die after you do the ping, right? Because you don't want to leave easy magic. So it's perfect that they just have 1 life. And for zero, it would be hard to give them because they're enabling circuit and they just teleporting themselves all over the place. They couldn't really have more. It's I would say it's a thematic unit. Like the baseline doesn't apply to them because their whole power revolves around lighting step and what they allow you to do with rack with circuit. So
Mhm.
very solid unit for that purpose. Then we have the witch, which is one of the best one magic units. I would say. You think about it, they are effectively in this deck. Like the way this deck is able to use them, 3 health, 3 attack range, which is way above the baseline. Which is for 1 magic, you get 2 health, 3 attack. The only downside is supposed to be that you need to damage them to be able to get that. But we know that that is trivial with circuit. That's just going to happen naturally, at least for the first time. And with 3 life, it makes it very likely that they can survive for one more turn and get another 3 attack. Plus the fact that they have some synergy with some of the events, so they can be attacking for 4 in some instances. So it's simply one of the best range units. Sometimes I've seen that when you don't have a good circuit, or when I'm playing against some people, they don't have a good circuit, they don't even deal the damage to her and they just attack for 1. And then they just wait for me to have to be the one that summons something and damages the witch. I'm not going to kill her. And then they can use the witch to attack me back, like kill me for 3, and maybe kill their own witch with the circuit, so that they don't give me the magic. So multiple ways of using her, and definitely one of the best range units, just because it's a 3/3, right? Way above the baseline of what you get on ranged.
Mhm.
Then we have the Striders. So this is the usual tank that decks have. It's perfect for what Thrak wants because Thrak wants to move forward, get closer to be able to build those circuits. But moving the whole set of units like that's hard to do. You only have three moves in this game, so that's why they gave them tireless. This that way, like you're moving Thrak, that's gonna consume one move, but then the one for the Strider, that is the bodyguard of Thrak, it's really not consuming any of that. And not getting pinged from circuit is massive in this deck. That makes it much harder for them to take them down and gives you time to keep doing circuit and keep getting units around Thrak to protect him while you keep doing that. So perfect unit for what this deck wants to do, even though it's very simple, like just 2/5 really, and just a free move. But this it's exactly what the deck wants. Like the synergy it has with the rest of the deck, it's what makes it really valuable. And finally, Kite Rider. This is the one that I guess more situational. It still gets played multiple copies of it, but it is the one that I discard the most from the common units. It's great because for those chains, you want sometimes you have to jump some units to get something to connect it, and if you're out of bolt swappers, the Kite Rider gives you that option there. The stats are decent for one magic, right? Like it's in this case probably better to have the extra health because what you're looking for is the circuit damage more than the attack damage. So I guess yeah, this show this is again the 4-1. We don't see this set of stats too often. Like the other one is in Vargoth, but that one really plays more like a 4-2. This one really plays like a 4-1. Has a very strong ability. Flight is always solid. Allows you to use this one as a blocker for Thrak when he's like forward position. Like he can come from the back and protect Thrak again. It's funny, Lightning Strike, that it was used on this one because it turns it into kind of a wild card unit that you never know if it's really gonna be beneficial even attacking with him or if you're gonna just end up losing more than you gain. Sometimes I don't even attack with him and just like forego my third attack, and it's like I don't want to risk it. Like I could lose more than I could gain, especially when that could kill it and break the chain or leave Thrak exposed or many things like that. It's hilarious to see, like when people use it and get greedy, and then it just breaks something and ends up being worse for them. It's a fun unit and plays well. I mean, you're getting what you pay for with those stats, and it has synergy with what the deck is trying to do. So solid design there and usable. So now let's take a look at the events. So the events, we have a similar situation. Overcharge is perfect for the theme of what the deck is trying to do because it's all about circuit. It's all about exploiting and abusing, building big circuits, but only dealing one damage in many instances might not be enough. But if you add one extra damage to that, that is enough to be killing some of the support units they could have in the back, right? Like there's a lot of units that just have 2 health that they can be keeping safe, but then if you manage to connect the circuit, you might kill them directly with this. And this applies to all the other units, so it has great synergy. The Witch attacks for 4, Braca moves 5 with it. Kiss deals like 2 damage, anything there, like that's a bit more like significant. I think even Isik, does it have a number on the? Yeah,
Yeah,
it
so it's
can
just a four.
pull Thrak like 4 spaces away instead of 3. So it has a small interactions with everything. The one that you will see the most is really just circuit. That's what you want on the Witch, extra damage. So this is a great event. I like that they costed it properly at 1 because you're getting a lot of value out of it. You're going to be getting usually at least like 3 or 4 damage at least out of it. So 0 would have been too little for that, but at 1 magic, that's reasonable for that 3, 4, 5 damage type of effect. Then we have Discharge. This is a great effect for this deck because, as you can see, the attack values you have, it's you don't really have any heavy hitters. I had like Striders at 2, Ball Swappers at 1, Witch 3 range, which is normal, but it's not a like the heavy range units tend to have 4, the ones that can't hit for 4. And then the Kite Rider, which is barely an attacker. Sometimes like he's such a bad attacker that you don't attack with it. So this gives you that solution to the tank units that some of the other factions are going to be presenting. The most decks have some type of tank unit, and this gives you an answer to it to be able to deal with it without having to use your 3 attacks plus circuit to try to bring a 5 unit. And it's costed properly. That's a extremely strong effect. You're getting like a free kill almost. So it's kind of pays for itself at the end of the day. It couldn't cost less because you're going to be killing something. So that gives you 1 magic. And that's the magic you paid for. In a certain way, it's almost like the free card you're getting for that effect.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is another great one that just gives the deck what it needs, right? Because otherwise, this deck sometimes has trouble dealing damage outside of circuit and dealing with those big 5 units like those tanks. Then I love this because this is another one that is exactly what it needs. Like it's hard to judge this on a baseline basis type of thing. We can compare it with similar effects like Stronghold, for example, in which this type of factions in which they want to move forward and get into the middle of the board or maybe even further with Mountain Bargath. These goblins usually they just want to stay around the middle. That's enough for the chains they're going to build. But even there, Rack could find himself really exposed, right? If they just blow up all of your units which were in front covering him and you don't have some forward gates to then retreat to, then you could be you find yourself in trouble. So this allows you to do those handle those situations or just do some type of reckless chains in which you just rush forward with Thrak to do a very deep chain into their side of the board that has no sustainability after the you blow everything up with a chain, and then you would just get destroyed. Well, you at least have two opportunities to do that and then just escape back. It's not easy to use because sometimes you just go all the way back and then they're happy about it because now you cannot do chains on them and you're in a tough spot of trying to get back into a good position. So I like that it's not an easy event to use, but it's the exact tool that you need in many instances to be able to start again, like get some big units to start moving forward with Rack behind them and start trying to build the chains. So perfect event for this faction. And finally, we have a recharge, which is well, it makes this is a nice epic event. You really feel how it sustains the theme of the deck, giving you that recursion. The thing with those chains is that, they're expensive from the resource perspective. Even though you're getting what feels like free damage, you're losing bolt swappers. So you're losing cards that you're going to be running out of eventually, and you're going to lose an economic game. But this gives you that recursion to have a fighting chance because not only you bring back from the discard, you use them that turn, and then you get them again for the next turn. So that feels like you never really run low on Bolt Swappers. If you manage to keep connecting the circuits, you can get a kill before you run out of Bolt Swappers. If those circuits manage to connect all the way to the summoner or get some massive value out of them, it also has a nice effect of giving you back some of the other common units, right? Which is one of the main uses. The witches, if they whiffed on the witch, then if it happened to be a turn that you're going to play recharge, you get the witch back because you're going to kill it with your own circuit damage. You get it back. Same thing with the Kite Rider. Not so much with the Strider because those don't get damaged by circuit. But getting those the commons back and denying them the magic, that's significant when the goblins need to win from the economic side. Like when they won't be able to get the kill, the assassination via circuit, or the slow slow kill on the summoner with circuit, because they just kept it back, they can still win an economic game because of recharge. So it has all the pieces to sustain. I like all these commons and units because by themselves they are not that strong by themselves. They're only really good when they come together to play the circuit game, and that's when they are really good. What do
Yeah,
you
no,
think about this one? So this is one of your favorite ones?
Yeah, like so I'm not to say that Storm Goblins is one of the strongest decks, but just in terms of uh, just thematically, I really like them. And also just playing them, it kind of feels like you're playing your own game, right? Your opponent, it's one of those factions, kind of like Cave Goblins, where your opponent has to kind of play a different game. Um, they have to play a little more spread out, a little bit more watch their gate positions. But yeah, no, I think you did a great job explaining them. In terms of champions, like you said, Braca, I think they all do different things, which are all kind of niche and useful. I really like the champ design, where all three of them are playable in different situations, and you're never sad to play one. Um, as well as I think 4 cost is a good price for them all. Um, the one thing which I would change, like you pointed out, is kite riders. Like most of the time, I never want to attack with them, just in case they hurt themselves. Like, especially with overcharge, where you can break up a chain because you take the 2 damage from lightning strike if you roll a special, as well as the 2 damage from a lightning chain. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think they're very thematic, and so um, they're just a faction which seems like they really do well against some factions which are forced to clump. For example, fungal dwarves, like we talked before, but other factions such as wayfarers who can really are very good at assassination, can sort of deal with these low health units which will be low due to um, circuits, um, as well as can play very spread out, can thrive on them. So
Hmm.
I've very much felt that against, for example, Tundra Orcs and Wayfarers, this faction is it's like almost like a 70-30. I think it's very hard for Storm Goblins to win. But other factions, it's also the reverse, 70-30, so it evens out, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, and the kite riders, yeah, they're not strong by themselves, but I do think they just fulfill that role. Like they plug those gaps in the circuits, and I love the concept because if you look at the faces of all these dudes, like they have that chaos element,
True.
right? Like they seem to be the ones that would thrive in that chaos, and it just plays really well with what the faction is trying to do because the whole thing is that you're really trying to rely on circuits as your main key to victory more than this like goblins which are just small goblins attacking. So that's why I think the design is really well. Like I can't imagine him in any other way really.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I was asked like, hey, how would you like redo this deck, I wouldn't really change anything on the deck because I just feel like everything is doing what the deck needs them to do to achieve that objective, and all the cards I want to play them. Like the kite rider might be the only one, but there are some scenarios that the one magic for it, I'd rather discard it because I want to make sure I can play a witch and a strider, and they are more useful for that cost. And I don't really need like a rider right now because I have some bolt swappers, but I play like two or three usually
Mm.
of them, and I feel they plug that hole in the deck that otherwise it would be hard to connect the circuits if you didn't have that flyer there. But having like a flyer that is also like flying into the other side to the summoner or whatever, and then hitting hard, like it would be harder to balance that out. So
Agreed.
that's why I wouldn't really change it, even though yeah, it's the probably the weakest link from all the other units. So I would say the goblins I would put them on the A tier, like easily on the A tier. It's funny because as you say, they are very polarizing from the perspective that yeah, some matches are really easy, some are very hard, but only until people start learning how to play against them, which is really tough because it's one of those very unusual factions. But once you know exactly what hurts them, it doesn't feel as busted as the first time that you play against them, and suddenly it's like, what the hell? Everything just died. Like, what just happened, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. I've heard some people saying, dude, that it's completely busted how like fungal dwarves have zero chance. And I think about like, yeah, they have zero chance if you just do the same thing with fungal dwarves and just rush forward and try to build your mass of units on their side of the
True.
board.
Hmm.
But what if you just stay back all the way on your side, trying to do the engine on your side? It becomes a different type of game, and it's
Hmm.
now a different challenge for them to get that. So it's that effect of I think they have the tools to do what they need to do. They don't have any bad cards. They don't have any bad events. Like all the events are pointing you to trying to do the circuit theme and they help you to achieve that. So yeah, I would definitely say like they are A tier and a very fun faction. Yeah,
Mm,
wouldn't really change any cards on them.
I agree. One fun trick you can do with grounded is if you have a dead turn where you don't have that much magic or you don't want to summon anything, you can just suicide Thrack in, get a nice chain and attack, and then just ground it back to your side of the board, safe and sound. I've done that a few times. It's fun. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so Eden asks, please ask Vexer if he will apply for a job as CBO at PGH. So Eden wants you to apply as Chief Balancing Officer at Plat Hat.
So I've been actually helping in the testing just as a end of cycle type of consultant. I just come in and do a little bit of testing at the end to try to look at the power balance, exactly that thing that he mentioned. So I started with the first one that I helped with was the Chosen Grove.
How cool.
And yeah, so I help on the next two, and right now, I'm helping on the current one. Well, I don't know really what's going to happen on the long term with some adjustments they're doing on the process. But yeah, after what happened with the Grogs, even like the and with the Shimmering Fae, I thought like, oh man, this is just too sad. And so I chatted with them like, hey guys, I could help out like trying to find those power balance issues at the end of the like before on the last set of patches, just to make sure like we don't get one of those type of scenarios again, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's hard sometimes for all the testers when they've been going through like 20 iterations of a deck.
Mm-hmm.
Everything starts kind of blending over about like, hey, this was too powerful, so now it's better, but it's still busted. But well, they don't feel it because it was better. It was even worse before, right? Like so, it's tougher. So yeah, I was just helping out on the last patches to try to just balance things out, right? Like just try to make sure that all the decks are on the A tier.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, hopefully you guys feel like in the next ones, I would say that they are in the A tier. With Chosen Grove, I feel like we're around there, even though the theme was very particular. So we'll talk about that one in the next video. I guess when the next pair of factions land, that
Yeah.
would be the complete. No, is that the complete or
There'd have to be two more, right? Because it's six, or is it?
two more? Right? Yeah,
Okay.
the next two, it's still gonna be. So then, yeah. So once the other two, that's just probably gonna be a while until those lands. Yeah, we'll do a review of all the wave five.
Very cool. Yeah, and hopefully at that time there might be other changes to other factions, which we can discuss. But thanks so much, Vexer. That was a lot of fun. Um, and
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for hosting this. Um, it's we ended up doing 3 hours, right? It's probably more than.
3 hours, 20 minutes. Yeah. Good.
Oh
Good.
boy, we just can't even do it less than three. This is so yeah, but this is how it goes. Hopefully, I think some people like the level of detail. Not sure if there would be a way of doing this as a summary version. If we're gonna discuss every card, you kind of have to explain why it's like above or below or at baseline, right? So
I think it's perfect. Look, I think. Anyways, people who are into Summoner Wars are. It's not a short attention span game. Usually, games last a while and require a lot of decision paralysis. So, um,
that's true. Yeah.
Nestle made it. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Vexer. Yeah, we'll be in contact for the next one eventually. And let me know if you want to in the future do like a starting setup tier list or like what you would change about starting setups. I think that could be a cool stream.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We'll stay in touch and see what other cool type of stream we can do.
Sounds good. See you
All
later.
right. Thank you, Trevor. See you guys. See you, everyone.